Chapter 27:31. Why was this place so big? The palaces he saw on TV were nothing more than this. Moreover, walking through the courtyard, there were bodyguards in suits standing at the door and hall, as well as servants wearing cheongsams. He didn't know that this handsome uncle was from a wealthy family. When he finally walked from the guest room to the dining room, Chu Xiaobao was so tired that he slumped on the chair. He was so tired that his eyes lost focus as he stared blankly at the antique wooden ceiling. He couldn't help but feel a little empty. Are you tired? The guest room is indeed a little far from the dining room, but just treat it as a morning exercise. The maid said with a smile. This place is really big. Chu Xiaobao panted slightly and said, I'm even hungrier after walking all the way here. What do you want to eat? I'll ask the kitchen to make it for you. I like to eat noodles. Chu Xiaobao said carefully. Okay. Is red soup noodles okay? Okay. The maid entered the kitchen. Taking advantage of her absence, Chu Xiaobao began to look around curiously, looking at every decoration in the dining room. The dining room was very big, with a strong new Chinese style. The tables and chairs were made of high-quality red sandalwood, and it was the most expensive red leaf sandalwood. Ordinary people might not think much of it, but red leaf sandalwood was expensive in the world, even if it was a string of beads. The Gu family was rich enough to polish it into furniture, cabinets, screens, and reliefs. Red sandalwood was also known as Hainan pear wood. Whether it was hardness, softness, or fineness, it was superior. From a medicinal point of view, it was Hainan Wang Wali. It had a fragrance that could adjust the environment. Therefore, as soon as he stepped in, Chu Xiaobao smelled a faint fragrance that refreshed the heart. The ceiling was made of black rosewood from Laos. Authentic black rosewood was sold for 6 figures per ton in the market. Authentic black rosewood from Laos was the best. The black rosewood here was also called big leaf red sandalwood. In fact, it was originally called big leaf red sandalwood, but later came out of the national standard. In the national standard, big leaf red sandalwood was called black rosewood, so now the standard name was black rosewood. It was very expensive. The Gu family was rich enough to make a large number of hanging ceilings. If it had to be converted in terms of money, such a restaurant, which was only a few dozen square meters, was probably worth tens of millions. Although it looked reserved, it was actually extremely luxurious. Chu Xiaobao walked to a shelf and found an extremely beautiful vase. Out of curiosity, he couldn't help but take the vase down and hold it in his arms, touching it with his small hands. Behind him, the maid's gentle voice suddenly came, Do you like to eat eggs? Ah! Chu Xiaobao was startled. His hand trembled, and he almost dropped the vase. Fortunately, he was nimble enough to catch it. He let out a long sigh and turned around, but his heart still had lingering fear. Sister, this vase is really beautiful. Is it very expensive? When the maid saw the vase in his hand, she was slightly startled. Then, she nodded and said, Yes. It was indeed very expensive. But this is not a vase. This is enamel from the Ming and Qing dynasties, also known as cloisonné. It's an antique. Xiaobao's hands almost trembled again. Antique? Cultural relics? He had seen special reports on cultural relics in the Forbidden City on television, so he had a very clear understanding of cultural relics. Cultural relics were priceless. It must be worth a lot of money. He tried to probe. Chapter 27:32. If it's put up for auction, it'll start at a few million yuan. The maid smiled as she introduced it calmly. Chu Xiaobao held his breath for a moment. He put the enamel back in its original position in trepidation, feeling like he had just survived a disaster. If he hadn't caught it in time just now, would he have to pay for it? But he had seen on TV that those relics were carefully placed in glass cases. No matter how bad it was, it wouldn't be placed so randomly, right? What if an antique vase was placed in the dining room and someone accidentally broke it? Chu Xiaobao asked with lingering fear, since this is an antique vase, why is it placed here so casually? Shouldn't it be more particular and be worshipped properly? The maid said disapprovingly, Old Master ordered this antique to be placed here. Why? Chu Xiaobao was even more confused. Because Old Master thought it would look good here. What kind of reason was that? This handsome uncle was so rich that he didn't even care about antiques and placed them casually. He didn't feel the pinch even if they were broken. He was so envious. If he was so rich, he could eat 10 sanding buns every morning. He wouldn't have to worry about saving money for lunch. He could eat and drink as much as he wanted. If he was as rich as this handsome uncle, wouldn't he be able to eat all the delicacies in the world? Forgive him for being so useless. As long as he could eat his fill, wear warm clothes, and have an endless supply of delicious food every day, he would feel very happy. When Gu Jinglian woke up, it was 9:00 in the morning. His biological clock was very punctual. It was 9:00 in the morning. When the butler brought his clothes over, he couldn't help but ask, "Where's the child from last night?" "Old Master, the child woke up very early and is having breakfast in the dining room now." Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows slightly. However, he heard the butler say, "Old Master, what should we do with the child?" Since he was awake and had eaten his fill, it was time to send the little guy away. He had already made an exception to let him stay at the Gu residence last night. Hence, Gu Jinglian instructed, after breakfast, send someone to take him to the police station. "Master, won't you see him again? That child seems to be clamoring to see you." "There's no need for that. It's hard not to feel annoyed when I see it." "Yes, I understand." The butler nodded and retreated. Gu Jinglian held his head lazily and got out of bed. He walked to the living room and sat on the sofa. He took a sip of the tea that the housekeeper had just brewed. He was used to being particular about tea in the morning. He had a bad stomach. Therefore, in the morning, she was used to brewing a cup of black tea. It was warm and very nourishing for the stomach. Gu Jinglian felt relieved when he thought about how he was going to send the child away this morning. His ears finally had some peace and quiet. After Chu Xiaobao finished his breakfast, he heard the housekeeper say that he was going to be sent to the police station. However, he was a little reluctant and looked depressed. "What about that handsome uncle? I want to find him. Master still has something to do after breakfast. It's not convenient for him to send you to the police station, so he ordered me to send you there." Chapter 27:33. He lowered his gaze in disappointment, as if he was a little sad. He couldn't help but feel a little lonely. Does handsome uncle hate me? Does he find me annoying? The old butler was slightly startled. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The child's thoughts were more meticulous than he had imagined. Master had never liked children. He had never been patient with children. Master liked cats and had a completely black cat by his side. When he was free, he would carry the black cat and take a walk in the yard. It could be seen that Master's personality was more of a loner. He didn't like children. However, he couldn't say it in front of Chu Xiaobao. Otherwise, it would inevitably hurt the child's heart. "He's just a little busy." The butler comforted him kindly. "Master has a lot of work to do, so he can't personally send you to the police station." "Oh. All right then." Chu Xiaobao nodded. He smiled slightly and said politely, "Thank you, grandfather." "It's nothing. This is my duty." The butler liked this child from the bottom of his heart. It was not because of any other reason, but because this child's facial features were very similar to Master's when he was young. Especially that pair of eyes. Although they were not the same, they were very similar. The most different thing was that when Gu Jinglian was young, his eyes were extremely indifferent, as if they were condensed with an ethereal mist. However, this child's eyes were extremely clear and had a kind of spirit and alertness unique to children. One look and one could tell that he was an intelligent child. It had to be said that this was a kind of fate. The butler prepared a small bag for him. It contained some snacks and desserts, as well as some water. When he arrived at the police station, he probably wouldn't have such good conditions. After all, the police station was busy with their own matters and couldn't take care of him. He was afraid that the child would be hungry in the police station and no one would take care of him, so he thoughtfully prepared snacks and drinks. Chu Xiaobao was a little embarrassed to accept it, but the butler said, "This was prepared by master." Did handsome uncle prepare it for me? Yeah. Chu Xiaobao said emotionally, "I didn't expect uncle to be so handsome, so rich, and so kind." The butler was speechless. The old master was handsome, young, and rich. He had to admit these 2 points. However, he couldn't agree with the phrase, "still so kind-hearted." After all, the child was innocent and did not know the ways of the world. The Gu family was not a good place. It was a dragon's pool and a tiger's den that many feared. Chu Xiaobao took the small bag with a smile and said happily, Then I'll reluctantly accept it." When the old butler sent the child to the police station, he happened to bump into the deputy director. The deputy director and the Gu family had been dealing with each other for many years. After knowing the ins and outs of the matter, he straightforwardly promised to help the child find a home. However, after some investigation, according to the clues provided by Xiao Bao and the names of his family members, they were unable to contact Chu Ho. Because the internet did not have Chu Ho's household registration information. As for the phone number provided by Xiao Bao, when he called it, he was notified that it was not in service. Chu Xiaobao stared at the number in confusion for a long time. He didn't know if he had remembered it wrongly, but in his memory, this was the number. Chapter 2734. The deputy bureau chief was also in a dilemma for a moment. He patiently asked if Xiao Bao had remembered wrongly. Xiao Bao scratched his head, and for a moment, he also had some self-doubt. He used to memorize Chu He's phone number by heart, but he rarely called her. Usually, he would just stay at home and watch TV if there was nothing important. Chu He asked him to memorize her number just in case. However, as time passed, he could not remember the number clearly. When he tried to recite it with difficulty, it was indicated that the number was no longer in service. The deputy bureau chief started from the household registration information, but he could not find any information about Chu Ho. This was natural. Strictly speaking, Chu Ho was a missing person. After being missing for 4 years, the family could apply for the cancellation of the household registration. But what was even more worrying was that Chu Ho did not have any memories of her identity. She had tried to find her identity, but she could not find any information about her on the internet. When she lost her memory, she went through the police network. Whether it was DNA comparison, face comparison, or ID card information database, she could not find any information about her past. There was no information, only a few special identities. First, Chu Ho might have been a returned Chinese in the past. She did not have any nationality, so it was difficult to search her country's information database. Second, it was unlikely that she was an illegal resident. Third, her identity was special. For example, if Chu Ho was a special organization of Jianghu, it would be difficult to find her identity information on such a network. This kind of organization had its own information database, and only after leaving the organization would the information be placed in the country's identity database. For example, special agents, or black officers. However, Xiao Bao did not mention that Chu Ho was a missing person. More importantly, he did not know much about Chu Ho's past. He only knew that he did not have a father. The deputy bureau chief searched for a long time, but he could not find any clues. Thus, he could only propose a DNA comparison method. However, this required the technical means of DNA testing. To draw blood. The housekeeper told the little guy about this, and the little guy's face immediately collapsed. Draw blood? The image of a doctor in a white coat holding a huge syringe appeared in Xiao Bao's mind. He immediately said with a sad face, "That must be very painful." He lied to him. "It won't hurt. Just poke it with a needle." Chu Xiaobao shook his head like a broken drum. No. Don't try to lie to me. Injections are very painful. It's so painful to poke such a sharp thing into the body. But if you want to find your mother, this is the only way. Otherwise, you can't provide detailed information about your mother, right? What about your father? At the mention of Daddy, Baby Chu lowered his head in disappointment and pouted even more aggrievedly. I don't have a father. The housekeeper tried his best to comfort, and finally managed to coax the tears that was about to come out of his eyes. In the end, Baby Chu finally decided to compromise. Hence, the deputy director sent someone to bring the child to the hospital to collect information. This old housekeeper was quite good at coaxing children. Chapter 27:35. He still had some tricks up his sleeves. After collecting Xiao Bao's DNA and sending it to the database for comparison, the deputy bureau chief said that it would take at least 2 days to complete. Hence, in the end, Chu Xiaobao was still brought back to the Gu family. Gu Jinglian was originally checking the accounts at the casino when he received a call saying that Xiaobao was not able to provide any useful information and was brought back to the Gu family. What? Gu Jinglian was obviously unhappy. Why didn't you leave him at the police station? The police station is short of manpower, so they won't be able to take good care of this little guy. Moreover, the little guy said that he wanted to go back to the Gu family to look for you. He seems to rely on you, old master, so. Gu Jinglian smirked coldly. Uncle Fu, I've never seen you so soft-hearted before. Uncle Fu smiled awkwardly. Gu Jinglian was too lazy to argue with him. Settle him down first and don't let him cause any trouble. Understood. Uncle Fu suddenly thought of something and had a flash of inspiration. He looked at Xiao Bao who was fiddling with his fingers and thought about it carefully. Old master, this little guy looks so much like you. Do you want to do a DNA test with you? Are you suspecting that he's my child? Gu Jinglian's lips suddenly turned cold and his tone froze. Do you think that with my style, I would be so sentimental as to leave a child outside? No, I don't mean that. Old master, please don't think too much, I'm just. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly and could not be bothered with him. He hung up the phone and continued to check the accounts. The accounts of the casinos were huge and could easily reach hundreds of millions. Generally speaking, he would personally check the accounts to prevent anyone from tampering with them. Checking the accounts of the 4 major casinos under the Gu family's name was extremely complicated. Only a capable person like Gu Jinglian could do it in a day. When the checking of the accounts was completed, it was already 8:00 in the evening. After dinner, he returned to the Gu residence. However, when he opened the bedroom door, he saw a certain little girl lying on her stomach in her pajamas on his big bed. She was reading a fairy tale comic on the bed with great interest. His expression immediately turned cold. When Chu Xiaobao heard the sound of the door opening, he came back to his senses and turned to look at the door. When he saw that it was him, he immediately jumped off the bed and ran to him. He smiled and said, "Uncle, you're back." Gu Jinglian's face darkened. "Why are you in my room?" I asked Uncle Fu. "He brought me here." Chu Xiaobao didn't have any ulterior motives and directly answered. Gu Jinglian's face turned ashen when he heard this. He gritted his teeth and said, "This old man, uncle, please don't blame Uncle Fu. I was the one who wanted to sleep with you." Chu Xiaobao still knew how to make excuses for others. Gu Jinglian resisted the urge to kick him out of the door. He raised his hand and pointed to the door. "Go back to your room." He was used to living alone since he was young. He had been alone since he was 3 years old. This habit had never been broken even after he became an adult and had a woman. Even though he had had a woman before, he had never stayed with anyone. He was already used to sleeping alone. Moreover, with his unreasonable obsession with cleanliness, he hated having too much physical contact with anyone. For women, it was just a biological need. "I don't have my own room," Chu Xiaobao muttered, feeling wronged. Chapter 27:36. But, it's so lonely to sleep alone. Moreover, the room is so big, I'm a little scared. I keep feeling that this house is eerie and scary, as if it's haunted. Chu Xiaobao had seen a domestic horror movie before, and the plot was set in such an ancient house. Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. Gu Jinglian's gaze turned colder, and his thin lips parted slightly. Kid, my patience is limited. Before he could finish speaking, Chu Xiaobao suddenly grabbed his hand and led him to the sofa with a smile on his face. Gu Jinglian was pushed to sit on the sofa with a blank expression. Chu Xiaobao went behind him with a fawning expression and started to massage his shoulders vigorously with his two small hands. Uncle, are you tired? Let me massage your shoulders. Gu Jinglian was speechless. This kid seemed to be good at bootlicking. Trying to please me? He raised his eyebrows coldly and glanced at him from the corner of his eye. He was not going to fall for this. No. I really think that uncle has worked hard. You must be tired after work. Let me massage your shoulders, you should be able to relax a lot. The corners of Gu Jinglian's lips twitched violently. Xiao Bao massaged his shoulders vigorously. Although he did not have much strength, he put in a lot of effort to massage him. After a while, he was sweating profusely and his back was covered in a layer of sweat. Gu Jinglian was too lazy to interrupt him. As he massaged his shoulders, he said patiently, Uncle, your house is so big. Gu Jinglian did not reply. Xiao Bao continued to nag to himself, one bedroom is as big as my house. Moreover, the bathtub is so big, it can raise so many goldfish. And? It's not good to live in a house that's too big. Xiao Bao said eloquently, such a big house makes people feel very insecure. Moreover, it's eerie, as if it's haunted. Chu Xiaobao saw that he was indifferent from the start to the end, and like a loyal dog wagging its tail, he walked over to him and lay on his lap. He lifted his little face, but his expression was so innocent that no one could bear to reject him. I'm most afraid of the dark and ghosts. If Mommy was here, she would sleep with me no matter how late she came back. So, Uncle, can you keep me company tonight? I'll tell you a story and coax you to sleep. He finally revealed his motive. This little fellow was only 5 years old, but he was already quite scheming. He knew that he had to curry favor with someone in order to achieve a goal. Gu Jinglian smirked and retorted, Do you think I'm you? It's okay. Uncle's sleeping alone, you're lonely. I can keep you company too. I'm a very interesting storyteller. I can tell you any story you want to hear. He did not have the habit of listening to bedtime. Gu Jinglian commanded coldly, Go back to your own room. Xiao Bao's expression froze. Gu Jinglian's coldness had frightened him. When he thought of going back to that big but eerie room and sleeping alone in the dark, he felt extremely aggrieved. He suddenly pouted, and his handsome and adorable face instantly wrinkled. His eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and he looked like he was about to cry. Chapter 27:37. Gu Jinglian suddenly felt a headache coming on. He was already fuming from reconciling the accounts. Now that he was crying and throwing a tantrum, his head hurt even more. As he cried, he saw Gu Jinglian's gloomy face. He was just putting on an act, but seeing that his expression was not, he was completely scared to tears. Hence, he sat down on the ground and rubbed his eyes with his chubby little hands. His wails were quite earth-shattering. It was as if the whole world was going to shake after his cries. Once a child's childish voice cried, his voice would be sharp and ear-piercing, especially loud. Gu Jinglian was shocked by his cries. He stared blankly at the crying little guy. Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. Uncle, you're so bad. You're so heartless. Boo-hoo. Uncle, you're a bully, he cried bitterly, and as he cried, he complained about his crimes. Stop crying. Gu Jinglian shouted at him. He glared at him fiercely. His fierce gaze frightened the little boy even more. Before he could finish a coherent sentence, Chu Xiaobao cried hysterically again, abruptly interrupting him. Wah! Gu Jinglian suddenly had a splitting headache, but there was nothing he could do about it. He was at a loss. He shouted at him again, If you cry again, I'll throw you into the pond to feed the fish. Wah! Uncle wants to throw me to feed the fish. Wah! Chu Xiaobao cried even more sadly, as if Gu Jinglian had done something so outrageous that even the heavens could not tolerate it. Gu Jinglian wanted to strangle him. He had never been patient with children, let alone the ability to deal with them. Just hearing Xiaobao's cries echoing in his ears made him extremely irritated. The fiercer he was, the more Chu Xiaobao cried. His eyes were red and swollen, and tears kept flowing out of his eyes. Pay attention, they were tears. He did not know where this child got so many tears from. They flowed without stopping. Were his eyes the source of a spring? Gu Jinglian had completely lost his patience. He suddenly stood up and wanted to leave. If this little fellow wanted to stay in this room, he would change rooms. In short, he didn't have the patience to coax this little ancestor. However, just as he stood up, Chu Xiaobao immediately cried and hugged his thigh, not letting him go. Uncle, uncle, don't abandon me, don't abandon Xiaobao, Gu Jinglian said coldly, I'm warning you, let go. Uncle, other than my mother, you're the best person to me. Even you don't want me anymore. Gu Jinglian was startled. Chu Xiaobao's tearful and sorrowful attack left him at a loss for words. Xiaobao didn't have a father since he was young. Uncle is like Xiaobao's father. He cares about Xiaobao and takes care of Xiaobao. Xiaobao silently swore in his heart that when he grows up, he will repay Uncle well and take care of him when he's old and when he's old. This guy was cursing him? Is it because Xiaobao is too troublesome, so Uncle doesn't want Xiaobao anymore? Gu Jinglian said bluntly, yes. Xiaobao stopped crying and stared at him anxiously. You're very annoying. Xiaobao's tearful eyes were glistening. Really? Xiaobao is really annoying. Very annoying. Sob. Chapter 27:38. He was originally aggrieved, but now he was crying sadly. Gu Jinglian was upset. He got up anxiously, left the room, and slammed the door. Surprisingly, Xiaobao did not chase after him. Instead, he cried even more sadly and fell to the ground. It was as if he had been abandoned by the whole world. He cried with incomparable despair. Gu Jinglian slept in the guest room. The guest room was very small compared to the master bedroom. He liked large rooms. Perhaps it was his personality. He did not like small spaces, just like his ambition that could not be underestimated. Xiaobao's crying made him full of anger. He went into the shower and took a cold shower. After washing up, he lay on the bed, but he could not fall asleep. Baby Chu's cries reverberated incessantly in her ears. He was completely brainwashed by his crying. He never thought that there would be a child who was not afraid of him at all and liked to stick to him. He never thought that he was fated to be with children. Young children tended to like people who were approachable. However, it was precisely the keyword of approachability that he had no contact with. Unfortunately, he met this little brat. No matter how he threw a tantrum, glared at him fiercely, and shouted at him fiercely, he was fearless. Instead, he actually felt sad when he said those heart-wrenching words. Dependence? Why did this child rely on him for no reason? Gu Jinglian closed his eyes, but Xiaobao's pitiful little face appeared in front of him. He suddenly opened his eyes, and his childish words seemed to echo in his ears. Uncle, I'm scared, you are the person who treats me the best in the world besides my mother, even you don't want me anymore? This little guy was quite pretentious. Was he still crying? Could it be that because of his unintentional hurtful words, he was so sad that he did not sleep and was still hiding in the room and crying? Another scene appeared in Gu Jinglian's mind. Xiaobao was trembling under the blanket alone, hiding under the blanket. Because he was afraid of the dark, he was so scared that he did not even dare to breathe loudly and was shivering. Children were all afraid of the dark, ghosts, and demons. He was only 5 years old, so he didn't have any ability to resist these things. What he said just now was indeed very hurtful. After all, she was a child. It was normal for her to be pretentious. Moreover, even if she liked to stick to him, it would only be for a short while. He was a man. Why would he be so calculative with a child? Gu Jinglian was caught in a dilemma. Half an hour later, he appeared at the door of the master bedroom again. He really felt like he was possessed. Gu Jinglian was dressed in his pajamas. He pushed open the bedroom door and thought that he would see the scene that he had imagined. For example, the clingy little brat was tossing and turning in fear under the blanket. However, as soon as he opened the door, the child's innocent laughter immediately rushed into his ears. Ha 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 ha. It was so fun. I want more. Gu Jinglian looked in the direction of the voice and saw Uncle Fu sitting on the bed, holding 100,000 little jokes. Xiao Bao was lying under the blanket, shaking with laughter. There were tears in the corners of her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. Instead, they were tears of laughter from the jokes. Gu Jinglian was speechless. What the hell? Chapter 2739. The child's face and the weather in June could really change so quickly. Uncle Fu heard the commotion at the door and immediately looked up. When he saw that it was him, he immediately stood up and smiled wholeheartedly. Old master. Why aren't you asleep yet? Not asleep yet? Wasn't it because he was worried that the little rascal was so frightened that he couldn't sleep well? Chu Xiaobao also noticed him and looked over. First, he glanced at him, then he crossed his arms angrily and turned his face to the side, as though he was angry with him. Humph. He seemed to be angry at him and snorted disdainfully. Angry at him? Gu Jinglian felt the anger that had subsided suddenly surge up again. He still had the cheek to be angry with him? Chu Xiaobao asked angrily, why are you back? You still have the cheek to look for me? Chu Xiaobao said angrily, are you asking me to forgive you? Humph. Scoundrel, big scoundrel, I won't forgive you. Gu Jinglian was so angry that his face was contorted. He glared at him, but before he could say anything, Xiaobao made a face at him and said, scoundrel, go away. I don't want to see you. Gu Jinglian's face was as gloomy as it could get. He had the urge to kick him out. When Uncle Fu heard this, he immediately tried to smooth things over and coax Xiaobao, saying, Xiaobao, you can't say that about Uncle. He's worried about you and concerned about you, that's why he came to see you. I don't want him to worry about me. Xiaobao said stubbornly, he's a scoundrel and he hates me. Why would he care about me? Xiaobao, good children don't hold grudges. Uncle must be worried that you won't be able to sleep, that's why he came to keep you company. Uncle Fu continued to smooth things over. Gu Jinglian was furious. Old man, do you want to die? Master, Uncle Fu immediately walked over and whispered into his ear, his heart aching as he said, when I entered the room just now, the little guy was crying sadly. His crying was earth-shattering. It took a lot of effort for me to stop his tears. I had to tell him a few jokes to make him stop crying. If you yell at him again, he might cry until dawn. Gu Jinglian was still angry. You need to be taught a lesson. Old master, it's not like you don't know that when a child cries, the sky falls and the earth rends. If he continues to cry uncontrollably, the entire Gu residence will be in chaos because of him. Gu Jinglian looked at him coldly. Are you blaming me? Make him cry? I wouldn't dare. This old man is not criticizing you, master. Uncle Fu continued to persuade him patiently. Master, why lower yourself to the level of a child? Moreover, children are a little childish and love to cry. But this child is sensible, cute, innocent and kind. He's not a troublemaker. It's quite pitiful that he lost his father at such a young age. The Gu family will take care of him for 2 days at most. Once there's news from the police station, he will be sent home. Master, you're wise. Don't lower yourself to the level of a child. Gu Jinglian's face was still tense. Why don't you go and coax him? Uncle Fu tried to persuade him again. I can see that this child likes you very much. Gu Jinglian took a deep breath. He didn't know where he found the patience to listen to Uncle Fu and not lower himself to the level of Chu Xiaobao. Thus, he walked to the side of the bed and sat on his side, looking at him coldly. Uncle, it's not good. Don't be angry, okay? Chapter 2740. He did not have much patience, and this was his bottom line. However, Chu Xiaobao did not appreciate it at all, and continued to raise his little face proudly, looking as if he did not care about it at all. Your apology is not sincere at all. Bang! Gu Jinglian's patience finally snapped. He clenched his fists tightly, making cracking sounds. Gu Jinglian suddenly clenched his fists. Uncle Fu saw that the situation was not good, and immediately rushed over and hugged his arm. Master, calm down. Baby Chu was also frightened by the man's frightening expression. He swallowed hard as he looked at the latter's horrifying expression, for fear that his neck would be broken if he said another word. If you have something to say it properly, don't fight. The little guy warned seriously. Do you believe that I won't break your neck? He gritted his teeth. Chu Xiaobao was so shocked that he was tongue-tied. He was so frightened that he immediately hugged his own neck, his face pale. How savage. He knew it, this scoundrel's gaze was as if he wanted to break his neck. Murder is against the law. Here, my words are the law. Gu Jinglian said coldly, Brat, if you don't know what's good for you, I'll really throw you to feed the dogs. Woo. Xiaobao pretended to cry again. Uncle Fu immediately comforted him with cold sweat. Xiaobao, don't cry. Master is just scaring you. Shut up. Gu Jinglian shouted angrily. Fu Bo immediately put on an extremely aggrieved expression. Gu Jinglian glared at Xiaobao angrily, and just like that, they stared at each other. After a long while, Chu Xiaobao swallowed again, licked his dry lips, and then said in a trembling voice, Uncle, don't be angry, I'll forgive you, okay? Let's make up, okay? I'm not angry anymore, and don't throw me to feed the dogs. Gu Jinglian furrowed his eyebrows. Seeing his sincere attitude, Gu Jinglian's angry expression improved slightly. It's a promise. Behave yourself and don't cry. Yes, yes. Chu Xiaobao immediately nodded his head like he was pounding garlic, his pair of innocent eyes staring at him. Gu Jinglian made a pact with him again. Sleep alone, be quiet, and don't make a fuss, okay? Okay. Chu Xiaobao was really afraid that he would throw him to feed the dogs, and quickly agreed to this condition. Go back to your room. Gu Jinglian ordered again. Chu Xiaobao could not wait any longer. She nimbly flipped over and got off the bed. She did not even bother to put on her shoes. Barefooted, she ran out of the room. Uncle Fu immediately said, I'll take him back to the guest room to rest. Gu Jinglian did not express his opinion, which was taken as a tacit agreement. Uncle Fu immediately chased after her and closed the door behind him. Once the little guy left, the room suddenly became quiet. Gu Jinglian immediately felt comfortable. He lay on the bed, and his ears were finally quiet. But what he did not know was that Xiaobao was really frightened by him. After returning to the guest room, he hid under the covers. He thought that if he was disobedient and restless, this bad uncle would really wring his neck and throw him to the dogs. He was terrified. So much so that when he returned to the room and hid under the covers, he was so scared that his whole body trembled. His tears and snot wet the pillow. No matter how Uncle Fu coaxed him, it was of no use. Gu Jinglian's words left a huge shadow in his young heart. It wasn't until dawn when the little fellow was tired from crying that he fell asleep in a daze with tears in his eyes. Chapter 2741. On the other side, another 24 hours had passed. Chu Ho finally began to feel anxious when he did not receive any news from Xiaobao for a long time. No matter how resourceful Mu Yanqing was, it would still take some time to find someone. After Chu Ho provided the license plate number to Mu Yanqing sent his subordinates to look for him. Because of Meng Qingxue, Mu Yanqing could not personally go to look for him. He had to stay in the hospital to take care of her. Chu Ho originally wanted to go along, but Meng Qingxue said that if he went along, the gains would not make up for the losses if he encountered danger. It was better to let Mu Yanqing's men go and bring the person and the car back directly once they found him. Although Chu Ho was worried, he could only force himself to wait calmly for news. Indeed, it would not help if she went. If she encountered a sudden situation and could not get along with the team, it would be counterproductive. Hence, Chu Ho waited patiently in the hospital for news. Meng Qingxue was even more anxious than him. She liked Xiao Bao. Now that Xiao Bao's whereabouts were unknown, she had a greater responsibility. Even though Chu Ho repeatedly emphasized that Xiao Bao's accident had nothing to do with her. However, Meng Qingxue did not think so. What she was thinking was that, if it were not her, baby Chu would not be implicated in this matter. Meng Qingxue was even more anxious. She did not know how to atone for her sins if Xiao Bao was not found. Just as she was feeling uneasy. Finally, at 3:10 a.m., Mu Yanqing received news that the target's car had been found. It was said to be parked at the entrance of a small underground gambling den in Yishan County. Gambling den? Yes. Are you sure it's a van? It's a Baojun 730 MPV. The license plate matches. It should be the person you're looking for. Mu Yanqing ordered expressionlessly, bring everyone back. Also, take good care of that child. Don't let him get hurt, do you understand? Yes. Understood. Yishan City was a large city right next to the capital. Although the city was large, it was economically backward due to its geographical location. Originally, the country wanted to support it, but Yishan City was surrounded by mountains. If it were to develop into an industrial city, there would be a lot of limitations. Therefore, Yishan City still focused on agriculture. Many young men and women who were born in Yishan City would go to Beijing to work after graduation. Tong'an County was one of Yishan City's counties with relatively good economic development. When Mu Yanqing's men arrived at the scene, they saw the Baojun with the black license plate A87B9L parked quietly outside the entrance. These two men were born and raised in Yishan City. One was called Luo Qing, and the other was called Luo Hao. They both came from Luo village. 2 years ago, they followed a large group of people from the county to work in the capital. In the beginning, they could bring home some money at the end of every year. However, as time passed, they gradually picked up some bad habits in the bustling metropolis. For example, gambling and ice skating. Ice skating was naturally not the kind of ice skating. They were involved in eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. As time passed, the savings they had accumulated were all squandered. The money they earned from working was not enough to pay off their debts. Thus, when they were at their wits' end, they began to engage in some unclean activities. Chapter 2742. Meng Qingxue was the biggest order they had ever taken on. After robbing the money from Song Enya, they returned to Yishan City. Initially, they vowed to start a small business, but as soon as they returned to Yishan City, they plunged into the county's gambling den. In just 2 days, they squandered more than half of the money they had earned. When Mu Yanqing's men arrived, they followed the clues and found their car. Hence, they sneaked into the small gambling den. The gambling house was a common type of underground gambling house. They usually played bullfights and the like. It was not a big deal, but this was only compared to the big gambling houses in the capital. A single win or loss could easily cost thousands or tens of thousands. For Yishan City, where the average income per person was less than 2 days, this was already an astronomical figure. At this time, the atmosphere in the underground gambling den was at its peak. When he found Luo Qing and Luo Hao and Luo Qing were playing happily. Luo Hao was casually chewing on a cigarette with a poker card in his hand. Amidst the smoke, his eyes were half closed. Luo Qing was standing behind him, watching with great interest. Suddenly, someone patted him on the shoulder. Luo Qing waved his hand unhappily. "Don't bother me, I'm nervous." "Are you Luo Qing?" A man's incomparably cold voice suddenly came from behind. Luo Qing froze for a moment before turning his head in shock. When he did, he saw a few men in black suits standing behind him. They were tall and sturdy, and their expressions were cold. The man in the lead had a pair of hawk-like eyes that stared fixedly at him as if they were knives. You. Who are you? Luo Qing swallowed hard and asked in a daze. Don't care who we are. Are you Luo Qing? Luo Qing suddenly realized something and his whole body began to tremble. He probably vaguely realized the identity of these people in front of him and staggered a step with a guilty conscience. Unexpectedly, he was also a quick-witted person. He knew that this group of people was coming for him and Luo Hao, so he quickly turned around and ran. Chase after them. Luo Qing ran out of the door, quickly unlocked the car, and started it. Seeing that the men in black suits were about to catch up, he stepped on the accelerator and wanted to escape. Alas, who would have thought that he would fall into a trap? Did they not know who sent these people? Most of them were soldiers. After careful consideration, they had already guessed that these two people would be restless and want to escape. Hence, they had done something to the car in advance. The forefront and rear tires were ruthlessly punctured. When they stepped on the accelerator, the car suddenly skidded, and the tires idled, and they almost flipped over. Luo Qing held on to the steering wheel, drenched in cold sweat. Knowing that he could not escape, but he did not dare to get out of the car. The man in the black suit stepped forward and grabbed the handle of the car door. He pulled it and it was locked from the inside. Luo Qing was secretly pleased with herself, but she did not expect the man to be so ruthless. She did not know where he got his strength from, but he pulled the locked car door open fiercely. Get out of here. Behave yourself. Chapter 27:43. Thinking that these men were sent by Song Enya, he immediately said, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have snatched that money. I'll definitely return Miss Song's money. 100,000 yuan, not a penny less. Please don't take me to jail. I beg you. What nonsense are you spouting? The man kicked him fiercely, and Luo Qing immediately fell silent. Soon, Luo Hao was also dragged out of the gambling den. He had just won some money and was feeling smug. However, before he could count the money in his hand, a group of strong men appeared out of nowhere and dragged him out. Even when his hands were handcuffed, he still didn't know what was going on. It was only when he was taken out of the door and saw Luo Qing squatting on the ground that he understood what was going on. So that's what happened. He also thought that Song Enya had called the police to arrest them. He could not believe that this woman really dared to call the police. For a moment, he gritted his teeth in hatred. However, just as they thought that they would be taken to the police station for interrogation, a man in black walked up to them and questioned in a deep voice, Where's the child? The child? Luo Qing and Luo Hao looked at each other in shock before saying, The child isn't with us. Who sent you here? Did Miss Song send you? What Miss Song? The man frowned unhappily and immediately took out a photo from a hidden pocket in his suit. It was a photo of Xiao Bao when he was 4 years old. Luo Qing stared at it for a long time before he realized who the child this man was talking about was. You're looking for this child? Luo Qing immediately said, This child isn't with us. Where's the child? The child, Luo Qing was in a dilemma. Luo Hao also said gloomily, The child really isn't with us. Wasn't he left in that warehouse? We took the money and left. We didn't care about the child. The man furrowed his eyebrows, clearly confused. Thus, he gave the others a look one after another. Let's bring these two people back first. Let Chairman Mu handle it. Yes. After a 12-hour drive, Luo Qing and Luo Hao were brought back to the capital overnight. In the ward. Luo Qing and Luo Hao were dragged into the ward. Chu Ho had not slept for 2 days and 2 nights. She was extremely sleepy, but because she was worried about Xiao Bao, she had not slept for 48 hours. She was so tired that her eyes were bloodshot. Chairman Mu, we've brought them. Luo Qing and Luo Hao were dragged into the ward. Their backs were violently kicked, and the two of them fell to the ground in an extremely sorry state. They struggled to stand up, but the black-clothed man behind them kicked them again. They could only kneel on the ground obediently with a mournful expression. Chairman Mu, these two men are called Luo Qing and Luo Hao. They are the people you're looking for. Mu Yanqing frowned and asked, "Where's the child?" He stood up abruptly and staggered over to them. She sized them up before turning around and asking, "Qingxue, were these two really the ones who took baby Chu away that day?" Chapter 27:44. Chu Ho turned around again, this time without any grace. She suddenly went forward, grabbed Luo Qing's collar with one hand, and asked fiercely, "Where did you hide Xiao Bao?" "Xiao Bao? Are you talking about that chubby little boy?" Luo Qing asked in confusion. He did not remember the child's name. "Don't you care? Where did you hide the child that you took away from here that day? Speak." Chu Ho's voice was laced with a thunderous aura. For 2 days and 2 nights, there was no news of Xiao Bao, and her patience had been exhausted. Luo Qing was scared half to death by her fierce expression. He trembled all over, and even his voice was trembling. That child wasn't hidden by us. We were just following orders. That child was brought to the capital by us. Then, we took the money and left. That child was in the warehouse, and we didn't take him with us. We don't know what happened to him after that. Due to his nervousness and great fear, his words were incoherent and unclear. Chu Ho lost her patience and gave him a hard punch. This punch was so powerful that it almost dislocated his jaw. Luo Qing was so scared that his face turned pale, but he did not dare to resist at all. He had never seen a woman with such a terrifying aura. That look in her eyes was as if she could not wait to skin them alive, as if she was a wild beast that wanted to devour humans. Meng Qingxue got out of bed and asked angrily, "That day, you broke into our house, stuffed Xiao Bao into a car, and took him away. What exactly happened? Who ordered you to do this?" It was only when these two men were kidnapped by Mu Yanqing that she believed that all of this was not his doing. If it was not him, who could it be? We were also following orders. The employer gave us money, so we did it for her. We took the child away, but when we brought him over, the employer said that it wasn't the child she wanted. What happened? Mu Yanqing also felt that something was amiss. The employer said that she wants, as Luo Qing spoke, she sized up Meng Qingxue who was standing at the side with trepidation. She wanted to say something but hesitated, seeming to have some misgivings. "Be honest and tell me everything. Otherwise, don't even think about leaving this place alive." Mu Yanqing chided sternly. With a plop, Luo Qing knelt on the ground in fright. He wanted to cry but had no tears. "Spare me. We have no enmity with this lady, but our employer instructed us that she wanted a child. We misheard her instructions and misunderstood her intentions. When we brought the child over, she said that she wanted the child in this lady's womb." Luo Qing explained in a trembling voice as she carefully looked at Meng Qingxue. Meng Qingxue's face paled, and she could not help but cover her lower abdomen with lingering fear. Mu Yanqing frowned coldly. "What do you mean?" "That employer said that she wanted the child in this lady's womb. She could either get rid of the child or kidnap her as well. But in a moment of folly, we mistook the child for the target and took him away." Meng Qingxue could not help but stagger a step, her heart beating like thunder. Chapter 27:45. Mu Yanqing came to his senses as well. His eyes were filled with anger, as if a storm was brewing. Finally, he gritted his teeth and enunciated each word clearly. "What's the name of your employer?" I don't know." Luo Qing lowered his head, appearing extremely guilty. How could she tell us her name so easily? This is not something to be proud of. We did not find out her identity or name. We only know that she seems to have a strong background and is very generous. She offered a high price of 500,000 yuan and said that as long as we complete the task, she will give us 500,000 yuan as a reward. 500,000 yuan? Was Mu Yanqing's child so cheap? Do you really not know her name, or are you deliberately hiding it from us? Chu Ho suddenly questioned. Luo Qing kept quiet. Luo Hao, who was standing at the side, suddenly thought of something and stammered, I remember that her surname is Song. She's a very young woman, dressed to the nines with heavy makeup. Her tone is very arrogant, like a rich missy from a big family. Song. At the mention of this name, Mu Yanqing's expression changed. He seemed to have some idea of the employer's identity. Song Enya? It's her. However, if it was Song Enya, it was not surprising that she would do such a thing. She probably knew that Meng Qingxue had left the capital and secretly settled down in Yan City to take care of her pregnancy. Meng Qingxue was pregnant with his child. If Meng Qingxue secretly gave birth to this child, it would indeed be extremely disadvantageous for her. He was not surprised that she would do this. Meng Qingxue was stunned, only to see a strange expression on Mu Yanqing's face. Being a sensitive person, she immediately guessed that he must have guessed who this employer with the surname Song was. Furthermore, he was very familiar with it, so when Luo Hao mentioned this surname, Mu Yanqing's expression changed instantly. You know her? Meng Qingxue could not help but ask. Mu Yanqing remained silent. Tell me. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists and said coldly, at this point, are you still trying to guard against me and hide everything from me? Mu Yanqing, I'm sure you know who this employer is. Tell me. Who is it? Mu Yanqing looked at her with a complicated expression. Then, he took a deep breath and said weakly, Song. Song Enya. Song Enya? This name was unfamiliar to Meng Qingxue, and she was puzzled. Mu Yanqing stroked his forehead with a headache and explained, she's my fiancée. Boom. Meng Qingxue's mind went blank at the sound of the explosion. That night, before I left the capital, I called you. Was she the woman who answered the call? Meng Qingxue made a bold guess. Mu Yanqing did not intend to avoid the topic and merely nodded silently. Ha! Meng Qingxue suddenly found it extremely funny. She laughed coldly and fell on the bed in a daze. For a moment, she felt like laughing and crying at the same time. She wanted to cry because she had almost lost the child in her stomach because of this woman. What was laughable was that he had openly announced Song Enya's fiancé. How ironic. Indeed. What reason did she have not to do so? Chapter 2746. As Mu Yanqing's fiancé and the future young mistress of the Mu family, what reason did this woman, Song Enya, have to let her hide in an unfamiliar corner of the city and secretly give birth to her and Mu Yanqing's flesh and blood? This child was a huge threat to her status. There was no reason for her to let it go. Hence, hiring a hitman to kill her had become a duty-bound action. She wanted to kill the child in her womb before it was born. She wanted to kill it while it was still in the womb. What a vicious woman. What a cruel method. Meng Qingxue sneered. Very well. This woman was so shrewd and scheming that she couldn't help but shudder in fear. However, at the same time, a certain force in her heart silently awakened. Since this woman called Song Enya had declared war on her in such a way, what reason did she have to hide in a corner and drag out an ignoble existence? Did she want to eliminate her and snatch Mu Yanqing away from her? Dream on. Meng Qingxue decided that no matter what, she would fight Song Enya to the end. She wanted to take back everything that belonged to her, even if it didn't belong to her. With this thought in mind, Meng Qingxue laughed coldly. Seeing her sneer, Mu Yanqing thought that she had been provoked. Just as he was about to walk over, Meng Qingxue pushed him away fiercely. Looking at Luo Qing and Luo Hao, she questioned fiercely, where is the child now? Great aunt, we really don't know. After taking the money, we took it that we had completed our mission and left. How could we be in the mood to care about that child? So, you left the child there? Luo Qing did not dare to speak. Where did you take the child? Seeing that they did not say a word, Chu He suddenly raised her leg and kicked Luo Hao's shoulder fiercely. There was a cracking sound, which seemed to be the sound of a dislocated shoulder joint. Luo Hao immediately clutched his shoulder and fell to the ground. She took a step forward, grabbed him by the collar, and said coldly, if you don't tell me the truth, I won't be merciful anymore. Speak. An abandoned warehouse in the outskirts of the capital. Luo Hao was in so much pain that he howled like a pig being slaughtered. His lips trembled as he said, the location of the transaction is a warehouse in the suburbs. That place used to be a famous industrial area. Later on, it was abandoned. As for the specific coordinates, I really remember them all too clearly. I only remember that there were many abandoned factories there. At that time, the child was left alone in the warehouse. After that, we left. Please spare my life, please spare my life. Motherf asterisk cur. Chu Ho cursed for the first time. He couldn't wait to tear these two men into pieces. I seem to remember a place in the suburbs of Beijing. It used to be a large industrial area. Later, the government wanted to transform it into an ecological park. However, the land was too polluted, so the project was put on hold and it became a deserted place. Mu Yanqing recalled for a moment and had some ideas. Meng Qingxue held his wrist tightly and said anxiously, "Then we will return to the capital tomorrow. The most important thing now is to find Xu Xiaobao as soon as possible. Maybe he's still there." What about you?" he asked out of the blue. Chapter 2747. Meng Qingxue glanced at Chu Ho, then looked deeply at Mu Yanqing before nodding solemnly. "Okay. I'll go back to the capital with you." Mu Yanqing's eyes lit up. "Really? You've changed your mind?" "Yes." Meng Qingxue had already made up her mind to fight Song Enya head-on. Since the latter was pushing her so hard and leaving no room for negotiation, then there was no need for her to hide and show mercy. Mu Yanqing was hers to begin with. She would no longer be weak. Even if she had to resort to unscrupulous means, she would take back what belonged to her. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists tightly and said to Chu Ho, no matter what it takes, I must find Xiao Bao. Don't worry. Chu Ho said, I'll go with you. Mu Yanqing glanced at Meng Qingxue. Seeing that she did not object, he nodded. Then let's pack up immediately and prepare to return to the capital. Okay. Ever since Gu Jinglian scolded Xiao Bao that night, Xiao Bao did not like to stick to him, nor did he call him uncle. In the morning, Xiao Bao woke up and stayed in his room alone. Uncle Fu liked him, so he took special care of him and carried a stack of comics for him. Uncle Fu had specially bought this stack of comics. Uncle Fu realized that this child seemed to be especially interested in drawing. No matter how restless he was, once a comic book was placed in front of him, he would immediately calm down. Hence, for the entire morning, Xiao Bao stayed in his room and quietly flipped through the comic books. During lunchtime, a call from the police station came in. On the other end, the deputy chief was holding the DNA report and comparing it with the data obtained from the DNA gene bank. He held the phone in his hand and was confused. He did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. Xiao Bao's DNA test results are out. When will you bring him to the police station to find out more about it? Have you found his family members? Yes, but I'm a little doubtful about the authenticity of this result. Perhaps there's a mistake with the system. So, is it convenient for you to tell Mr. Gu to come to the police station with Xiao Bao personally? There are some situations that require his presence. Uncle Fu furrowed his brows, nodded, and said solemnly, I understand. As soon as Gu returned to the Gu residence, Uncle Fu came up to him nervously and briefly explained the matter. Why do you want me to go? That's what the chief said. President Gu, do you have any plans for the afternoon? No. Gu Jinglian said lightly, I have no patience for that child anymore. You can just send him to the police station. After saying that, he walked around Uncle Fu and walked towards the study. Butler Fu suddenly chased after him carefully and said worriedly, Mr. Gu. I suspect that the director asked you to go with him personally, not because of any other reason. It's because, you have to go. Gu Jinglian sized him up coldly with a strange expression. He asked faintly, what do you mean by that? Uncle Fu stammered and seemed to have some concerns. I can't really say because there's something that I'm not sure about. Anyway, old master, there's nothing wrong with you going along and personally verifying it. Chapter 2748. Uncle Fu could only explain vaguely, I don't really understand what the deputy bureau chief meant. He only said that there are some things that you need to verify personally. I suspect that the results of the DNA investigation are probably related to you. Me? Gu Jinglian curled his lips coldly and his gaze gradually turned cold. What does it have to do with me? Uncle Fu lifted his eyes and glanced at him. Then, he said carefully, it's a parent-child relationship. Gu Jinglian's expression changed. Then, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, he said coldly, you're joking with me. Old master, I wouldn't dare. Even if I had eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts, would never dare to joke about such things. Uncle Fu felt extremely wronged. He looked like he was about to burst into tears. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. That's impossible. How can that little rascal be my son? He's so timid and stupid. My son would definitely not be as stupid as him. Uncle Fu thought to himself, isn't it a little too early for old master to say these words? What if he got slapped in the face? Suddenly, there was some movement in the room. Uncle Fu could not care less about Gu Jinglian's expression. He hurriedly pushed open the door and rushed into the room. He saw Xiao Bao lying on the bed, his tender and fair legs bouncing up and down. He seemed to be really satisfied. The commotion just now was because his movements were a little too big, and he accidentally swept the finished comic book to the ground. When Uncle Fu carried Xiao Bao out of the room, Chu Xiao Bao was halfway through the comic book. It was an exciting moment when he was abruptly interrupted. He felt extremely wronged. His little face was wrinkled and he looked like he wanted to cry but had no tears. However, when Uncle Fu carried him out, the little guy looked up and saw Gu Jinglian leaning against the door with his arms crossed and a cold expression. Especially when the little guy met Gu Jinglian's incomparably cold gaze, his originally stormy little face completely collapsed. He closed his eyes tightly and opened his mouth, letting out a wail. He was so frightened that he started crying loudly. Wah, Gu Jinglian was already in a bad mood. He was even more baffled by the little guy's actions. His face suddenly became gloomy, and as a result, his expression became even more cold and terrifying. Xiao Bao could not help but feel his hair stand on end. He grabbed Uncle Fu's sleeve tightly. Because he was afraid, he finally could not care less about his little stubbornness and started crying loudly and wantonly. I want to go home. Mommy. He cried loudly and hugged Uncle Fu tightly. Tears rolled down from his eyes uncontrollably. Mommy. I want Mommy. Gu Jinglian had a splitting headache from his actions. He shouted angrily, don't cry. This ferocious cold shout scared Xiao Bao even more. He waved his hands, obviously wanting to stay away from Gu Jinglian as if he was seeking protection. He stared at Uncle Fu with tears in his eyes, making people feel pity for him. Sob sob. I want to go home. I don't want this uncle. Xiao Bao, don't cry, okay? Be good, we'll take you to find Mommy. Uncle Fu immediately comforted him, Uncle, carry me, okay? I don't want him, I don't want this uncle. This uncle is so fierce, he'll definitely eat me. Chapter 2749. Even if uncle doesn't eat me up, he'll break my neck and feed me to the dogs. Boo-hoo. Xiao Bao doesn't want to die. Gu Jinglian's threat from last night was still fresh in his mind. Uncle Fu coaxed him helplessly, Uncle is not a monster. Gu Jinglian was extremely helpless. He finally couldn't take it anymore and sent someone to drive the car over. Then he instructed Uncle Fu, hurry up and send this little guy to the police station. With that said, he went into the study in frustration and slammed the door shut. Uncle Fu couldn't help but shrug nervously at the loud noise. Uncle Fu had no choice but to send Xiao Bao to the police station alone. The car slowly drove into the police station. Uncle Fu carried Xiao Bao out of the car and walked into the police station. The bureau chief had been waiting for him for a long time. He was surprised to see that Gu Jinglian didn't come with him. Where's Mr. Gu? Mr. Gu is very busy. Deputy Bureau Chief, please tell me what you need. The Deputy Bureau Chief frowned and sighed. It's like this. We sent Xiao Bao's DNA to the gene bank for comparison. The results are a complete match with Mr. Gu's. That means, this child might be related to Mr. Gu by blood. Might be. We can't rule out the possibility that there's something wrong with the system. So I wanted to invite Mr. Gu along to see if he's willing to cooperate and do a DNA test with Xiao Bao. This way, the results will be more accurate. Uncle Fu lowered his head and glanced at Xiao Bao, who was trembling in his arms. He frowned and suddenly hissed. He seemed to be worried. As if he had gone through a long mental struggle, he suddenly asked cautiously, Mr. Gu isn't here. But for the DNA test, can we use his hair? When he was cleaning the room this morning, he paid special attention to the bed pillow. It took him a lot of effort to find a very short strand of hair on Gu Jinglian's bed. Thus, he collected it. It was not because of any other reason. It was because Xiao Bao and Gu Jinglian looked too similar. In this world, there were no two leaves that were exactly the same, and there were no two people who looked so similar for no reason. They weren't related to each other, but not only were their facial features similar, the unintentional expression between their eyebrows was also 50% similar. He paid special attention to it. Coincidentally, the deputy director had called him in the morning to tell him the results. Uncle Fu felt even more strange in his heart. He increasingly suspected that Xiao Bao and Gu Jinglian were really related by blood. Could it be that he was Master's illegitimate child? Thus, Uncle Fu carefully took out a well-wrapped handkerchief from his pocket. He opened the handkerchief and carefully wrapped a strand of hair in the middle. The Deputy Bureau Chief asked, "Are you sure this strand of hair belongs to President Gu? If you make a mistake, it will affect the results. It can't be wrong. Next, I'll have to trouble the Deputy Director to examine it." The Deputy Bureau Chief nodded. "It's a small matter. We'll get the results in the afternoon." Then, Uncle Fu immediately asked, "Have you found the child's mother?" No. The Deputy Bureau Chief nodded solemnly. "There are still no results in the DNA database. Anyway, the DNA test will take some time. I'll contact you in the afternoon when the results are out." Chapter 2750. In the car, Xiao Bao sat sullenly in Uncle Fu's arms. He pouted and muttered, "Uncle, that uncle is also very fierce to you. Don't you hate him? Although old master's temper is a little eccentric, he's very good to me. Although he doesn't show his concern, there are times when he occasionally shows his gentleness." The little guy did not understand what Uncle Fu was saying. He tilted his head with a puzzled expression and blinked his black eyes at him, but he did not understand the adult language. In the little guy's heart, Uncle Fu was a very gentle elder who was good to him and cared about him. In comparison, although that handsome uncle had a beautiful face, he felt that his heart was very black. It turned out that not all bad people were ugly. There were also people like this uncle who, although good-looking, was actually fierce and evil, just like a demon king. In Xiao Bao's ignorant heart, Gu Jinglian's image had already been stamped with a seal of approval, a demon king. If Uncle Fu knew what the little guy was silently criticizing at this moment, he would probably not know whether to laugh or cry. Last night, Meng Qingxue decided to return to the capital with Mu Yancheng. Naturally, Chu Ho wanted to follow them. After obtaining a precious clue, she naturally wanted to go to the capital personally to find Xiao Bao. Hence, there was no time to even pack her luggage. Anyway, to Meng Qingxue, there was nothing useful, just some personal belongings and daily necessities. These could be bought again when they returned to the capital. Now that time was of the essence, it was not something that could be measured by these worldly possessions. Meng Qingxue and Mu Yancheng were in the same car. Chu Ho, on the other hand, was in the other car. She had not slept for 2 days and 2 nights and was extremely tired. Hence, not long after she got into the car and set off, she leaned against the back seat and fell asleep. Where was Meng Qingxue? She was also exhausted. She had been on tenterhooks for 2 to 3 days. Although she closed her eyes to rest, she did not sleep well. After all, she had been trembling in fear and worried about Xiao Bao's whereabouts, so she could not sleep well. Hence, after getting into the car, she leaned on Mu Yanqing's shoulder and closed her eyes to rest. After a while, she fell into a deep sleep. Feeling the weight on his shoulders, Mu Yanqing tilted his head to look at her before lowering his gaze to her flat stomach. He did not know if it was because she was too skinny, but her lower abdomen still looked flat and did not show any signs of bulging. She was probably too thin. He remembered that when his sister was pregnant, her belly was already slightly swollen at 3 months. What about Qing Shui? There were no signs of pregnancy. And Qing Shui? He glanced at her and saw that she was sleeping peacefully. He lowered his eyes and unexpectedly reached out his large palm. His warm palm gently pressed against her lower abdomen. His movements were extremely gentle, as if he was afraid that if his movements were too big, it would disturb the little life that was still sleeping in her stomach. Even through the belly, he couldn't sense any signs of life. She was more than 3 months pregnant, so there shouldn't be any fetal movements, right? He often saw men who were excited to become expectant fathers and excitedly pressed their hands against their bellies to listen to the fetal movements. He felt that it was ridiculous. Chapter 27:51. It should be laughable, right? However, the birth of a life could indeed change a man's mentality to a great extent. Initially, when he learned about the birth of the little life, he was at a loss and even a little suspicious. One had to know that he had always taken good contraceptive measures. He rarely let her take pills. It was not that he had never had sex with other women, but usually, after having sex, he would urge his women to take the morning after pill. After all, there were many women who wanted to carry his child. Naturally, he would not let any fish escape the net. However, when it came to Meng Qingxue, he was more proactive. Usually, he would take the initiative to take precautions. Sometimes, when he really could not help himself and was not prepared beforehand, he would let her make up for it afterward. However, it was also very rare. After all, he knew that it was not good for a woman's health to take such pills. However, when he found out that she had a child with him, he found it hard to accept at first. He was not ready to be a father yet. A man in his 20s was still very playful. Especially at this critical juncture where the Mu group was in a crisis, he felt even more repulsed. Gradually, however, it was only after Meng Qingxue left that he came to realize that he had developed so many feelings for her that he should not have. He actually had great expectations for the little life in her stomach. He actually did something that he used to think was the stupidest thing. For example, Mu Yanqing carefully held her head, bent down slightly, and gently pressed his ear to her lower abdomen. However, after listening for a while, he did not hear anything special. There shouldn't be any fetal movement in 3 months, right? Mu Yanqing furrowed his brows and muttered to himself. He raised his head and met Meng Qingxue's indifferent gaze. Why was she awake? Mu Yanqing thought of how she had seen all of his silly actions earlier. Feeling embarrassed, he could not help fidgeting uneasily in his seat. When did she wake up? Wasn't she asleep? Then, did she see everything he did just now? Mu Yanqing bit his lip speechlessly. Meng Qingxue could not help but ask him, "What are you doing?" Ahem. Mu Yanqing furrowed his brows and pretended to be calm. Picking things up. Meng Qingxue smiled and asked, "Why are your ears on my stomach when you're picking things up?" Mu Yanqing was even more at a loss for words. Meng Qingxue suddenly said, "It's still early. I can't hear any fetal movements." Mu Yanqing did not bother to hide it anymore. He cleared his throat awkwardly as his cheeks turned unnaturally red. At this moment, his phone suddenly rang. Mu Yanqing was stunned for a moment. He picked up his phone and saw a string of numbers flashing on the screen. The number was not saved, but from the last digit, he knew that it was Song Enya's number. He did not make any special remarks. Mu Yanqing stared at the number in a daze. After a moment of hesitation, he suddenly hung up. Meng Qingxue had a strange look on her face. She couldn't help but ask, "Why aren't you answering?" "Oh, it's not a particularly important call. Was it Song Enya calling? Meng Qingxue asked. Mu Yanqing's face stiffened again. Before he could explain himself, his phone rang again. It was Song Enya, who was persistent in calling him. The urgent ringtone kept urging him to hurry up. Chapter 2752. Meng Qingxue said calmly, "It's okay. Just answer it. She must have something important to tell you." He said, "I don't want to answer it. But you haven't answered it, and she keeps calling. The ringtone is very noisy." Since Meng Qingxue had said so, Mu Yanqing seemed to have no reason not to answer the call. He was worried that Meng Qingxue would mind, but seeing her indifferent expression, he answered the call. "Hello? Yanqing. Why did you hang up on me just now?" Song Enya's gentle voice came from the other end. She asked patiently, but her words expressed a lot of dissatisfaction. "Is it inconvenient?" Mu Yanqing felt an inexplicable sense of annoyance when he heard her voice. The thought of this woman being so heartless to force Qingxue to such a state made him feel that it was unreasonable. However, he still hadn't sorted out the series of events, and he hadn't figured out how to deal with it. "What's the matter?" Song Enya was dissatisfied with his tone and sounded a little impatient. Hence, she became a little unhappy. "Must I only call you when something's up?" "It's nothing. There's nothing to talk about." Mu Yanqing's attitude was very cold. Compared to his previous aloof attitude toward her, it was much more indifferent. Hence, she said with some dissatisfaction, "Where have you been these 2 days? You didn't even answer my calls. You seem very busy." How could Song Enya not know where Mu Yanqing had gone? She knew that Mu Yanqing had personally led his men to Yen City, but she did not know that he was now on the way back to the capital with Meng Qingxue. "You don't have to ask so much about my whereabouts, do you?" Yanqing. Song Enya was slightly dissatisfied and, at the same time, aggrieved. "You're my fiancé and my future husband. No matter how unwilling you are, you can't deny this fact. As your fiancé, don't I have the right to ask about your whereabouts?" Her voice fell into Meng Qingxue's ears through the receiver. She couldn't help but frown as her eyes gradually turned cold. When she found out that the 2 men were acting under her orders and that she was the culprit behind her unborn child's death, her hatred for the Missy had reached its peak. Maternal instincts dictated this. Any mother would not tolerate any sand in their eyes. They would never allow anyone to harm their own flesh and blood. Even though she did not know who Song Enya was, she was already at loggerheads with her after what had happened. At the thought of this, the corners of her lips curled up coldly. She reached out and hugged Mu Yanqing's arm. Frowning slightly, she pretended to be uncomfortable and groaned softly. On the other end of the line, Song Enya, who was holding the phone and listening to the silence for a long time, suddenly heard a woman's faint moan. "It hurts." Meng Qingxue gently covered her lower abdomen with a pained expression. "Yanqing," Song Enya was sure that she heard a woman's voice from the receiver. For a moment, she became nervous and immediately suspected Meng Qingxue. "He's with that B***TCH? Meng Qingxue? Who else could it be if not this woman?" Chapter 2753. Don't tell me that he's bringing Meng Qingxue back to the capital to nurse her pregnancy. At the thought of this possibility, an inexplicable fire ignited in her heart as she felt a great sense of crisis. "Mu Yanqing. Did you hear what I said?" At this moment, Mu Yanqing was a little alarmed by Meng Qingxue's weak moans of pain. However, Song Enya's stern voice on the other end of the phone made him lose his patience, and he could not help but sound a little anxious. "What? Mu Yanqing, who's that woman beside you?" Song Enya asked aggressively. "Are you questioning me?" Mu Yanqing retorted expressionlessly. "It's none of your business who I'm with, right? Mind your own business and don't worry about me." With that, he looked at her worriedly. Seeing her pale face, his eyes suddenly became a little flustered. "What's the matter?" "It hurts." Meng Qingxue's voice was more like an invisible provocation. Although it was very weak, it was still brazenly provoking Song Enya's brain. There was no need to think about who had made that sound. She could even tell that Meng Qingxue was deliberately diverting Mu Yanqing's attention while blatantly provoking her through the phone. This Meng Qingxue must know who called Mu Yanqing, so she's provoking me so arrogantly. D****. Mu Yanqing. Song Enya was so angry that the veins on her forehead were throbbing. I'm busy now. Mu Yanqing said coldly and hung up the phone. Song Enya held the phone in a daze. When she heard the busy tone from the other end, the corners of her eyes twitched violently. She was so angry that she actually smashed the phone on the ground. B***tch. She cursed angrily. As if not venting her anger, she picked up the phone and smashed it again, as if the phone was Meng Qingxue. Is this Meng Qingxue planning to officially declare war on me? Was she trying to declare her sovereignty over her by doing this? At the thought of this, Song Enya could not suppress her anger. Her face was ashen as she clenched her fists. Suddenly, her lips curled into a bloodthirsty sneer. Fine. Meng Qingxue. Since you've declared war on me, then I'll naturally accompany you to the end. Mu Yanqing's attention was focused on Meng Qingxue after he hung up the phone. Thinking that she was in pain again, he carefully placed his large palm on her lower abdomen and anxiously said, "Hold on for a while more. We'll be in the capital soon. Once we're in the capital, I'll transfer my lower abdomen earlier, but it's better now." Meng Qingxue smiled weakly. She felt a little satisfied when he hung up on Song Enya without any hesitation. Between her and I and Song's between the two, Song and Qingxue's, this man's is that? This knowledge made her somewhat elated. At the very least, he cares about me. Alright, don't worry and don't be so nervous. Didn't the doctor say that I'm fine? Meng Qingxue consoled him, feeling amused. He reminded her worriedly, if you feel unwell, tell me immediately. Don't hide anything from me. Chapter 2754. Uncle Fu brought Xiao Bao Chu around the Wanbao building. The Wanbao building had a very famous children's entertainment place called Leji Children's King. There were many game machines that were suitable for Xiao Bao to play. Chu Xiaobao had never seen such a bustling building before, let alone such a bustling place. Leji Children's King sold products for infants aged 0 to 13, including clothes, milk powder, calcium tablets, and toys. Chu Xiaobao, who was originally in a very low mood, was immediately attracted by the many toys displayed in Leji Children's King when he stepped into the shop. For a moment, he was like a little mouse that had fallen into a rice jar, and all his unhappiness was thrown to the back of his mind. Uncle, look, look! Chu Xiaobao ran in front of a whack-a-mole game machine, and his eyes lit up. What is this? Uncle Fu walked over and squatted down beside him, and then patiently said, "This is a game machine. Do you see these little mice?" After a pause, Uncle Fu smiled and picked up a small red hammer that was hanging at the side. He handed it to him and explained, "When the game starts, these little mice's heads will pop out of the holes. At this time, you have to use the small hammer in your hand to hit the little mouse's head hard. This way, you can get 1 point." Wow! Xiao Bao's eyes seemed to have countless little stars surging. It seemed very fun. Chu Xiao Bao's eyes were filled with anticipation. Then does this game require money to play? Although the little guy was still young, he already had the concept of money. He already knew that when he was outside, there were many things that required money. However, his mother had told him before that he could not simply spend other people's money. Therefore, he did not mention that he wanted to play. Instead, he looked at the flashing red light of the game machine with a yearning look on his face. Uncle Fu could tell what he was thinking. He smiled knowingly and immediately called the shop assistant over. He then paid for the coins and returned to the game machine with the coins. He saw that Xiao Bao was still holding the small hammer and staring at this extremely novel toy, so he deliberately teased him. "Xiao Bao, do you want to play?" Xiao Bao nodded heavily without any defense, but suddenly thought of something and said carefully, "This game costs money." "Forget it. I'm just looking, not playing." Here. Uncle Fu opened his palm. Xiao Bao looked over and saw a few coins lying quietly in his palm. He was surprised. What are these? Coins. As long as you put in the coins, you can play. Once he heard that he could play the game, Xiao Bao could not help but be excited. His face was flushed with excitement and yearning. He asked tentatively, "Can I really play?" Of course. Uncle Fu smiled knowingly and then put a coin into the terminal. After a while, the screen showed, "Start." He gently urged, "Xiao Bao, the game has started." Ah! Xiao Bao immediately raised the small hammer in his hand and smashed it heavily on the little mouse's head that popped out of the hole. Squeak squeak. The little mouse let out a scream and retreated back into the hole. So fun. So fun. Chapter 2755. It was Xiao Bao's first time playing, so his reflexes were not particularly nimble. Although he used a lot of strength, he was sometimes too nervous and could not perform well. Several times, he missed his target. Uncle Fu also became nervous and kept pointing out the mountains and rivers. Quickly hit that side. Over there, over there. Here. Baby Chu panted as he hammered away at the wall with his small hammer. Uncle Fu watched from the side and couldn't help but sigh silently in his heart. Thinking about the old master when he was young, he still remembered that when Jinglian was 6 years old, they went to the commercial street to play. At that time, there was a huge pirate ship in the middle of the commercial street. At that time, Gu Jinglian was young. At the age of 6, he was really at his most playful age. He clamored to play. However, as the future successor of the Gu family, the family had extremely high hopes for Gu Jinglian. As the eldest son of the Gu family, Gu Jinglian's every word and action were strictly controlled. At the age of 4, he had already started receiving strict training. Shooting, karate, jujitsu, he still remembered the first time he went to the shooting range. Little Jinglian threw a tantrum because he did not like such a serious occasion. In the end, his strict father threw him into the detention room as punishment. For the entire night, he knelt in the detention room and was not allowed to get up. The next morning, it was Uncle Fu who personally carried him back to his room. He had already lost all feeling in his knees and was unable to stand. From then on, his personality changed drastically. He was no longer as energetic as a normal child. His personality also became increasingly gloomy and he did not like to get close to anyone. At the age of 6, Gu Jinglian had already seen countless bloody scenes with his father. Once, at the casino, the 6-year-old Gu Jinglian watched helplessly as a gambler who cheated had his hands crippled by the casino's hired thugs. The ground was covered in blood, but there was no fear on his young face. It was as if this was a normal scene. Uncle Fu looked at Xiao Bao and sighed. At the end of the round, the little guy was sweating profusely, but he only got 10 points. The shop assistant stood to the side and watched. Chu Xiao Bao's serious expression as he played the game was too funny. She couldn't help but ask, "Little friend, is this your first time playing?" Chu Xiao Bao nodded in a daze and looked at her shyly. The shop assistant explained, "If you can clear the game and break the record, you have a chance to win a heavyweight prize." Chu Xiao Bao's eyes seemed to be filled with countless little stars as he asked excitedly, "What's the prize?" The shop assistant pointed at the rules of the game and briefly introduced them. The final record was 100 points. Uncle Fu looked at it carefully. If he could break the record, he would be able to get the latest AI robot developed by Leji Holdings. It was a global limited edition. However, there was a prerequisite. Parents could not give any help in this game. The child had to break the record with his own strength in order to win the prize. Uncle Fu and Xiao Bao talked about this. Chu Xiao Bao clenched his fists and looked determined to win. "I will work hard and win the prize." He looked like a tiger eyeing its prey with ambition in his eyes. Uncle Fu stayed by his side and was responsible for putting in the coins for him. He silently watched over him. Halfway through the game, the police station called. Chapter 2756. Thus, he walked to the side and picked up the phone. On the other end of the line, the deputy bureau chief sounded worried and conflicted. The diagnosis report is out. It's basically confirmed. When Fu Bo heard this, he frowned slightly. Are you sure? There can't be any mistakes. As long as there's no problem with the sample you provided, it's basically confirmed. Fu Bo couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. In the end, they couldn't be bothered to play games anymore. Uncle Fu carried Chu Xiaobao back to the Gu family in a hurry and immediately asked about Gu Jinglian's whereabouts. His subordinate reported that Gu Jinglian had just left to survey the territory. The Gus intended to invest in a piece of land to build a financial center. That piece of land was what Gu Jinglian had liked previously. He had bought it through an auction. The area wasn't particularly prosperous, but the rail transportation was very convenient. In the future, when it was developed into a financial street, it would have great prospects. Did Old Master say when he'll be back? That person shook his head. No, Old Master didn't say anything. Uncle Fu frowned and carried Xiao Bao to the seat beside him. He paced back and forth a few times and suddenly asked, "Ah-ee, you've been following Old Master all this time. Have you ever found out what kind of women he has around him?" Ah-ee looked at him in a daze. He obviously didn't understand why he had thrown this question out of the blue. "Uncle Fu, why are you suddenly asking this?" "There's a reason why I'm asking you this. You just have to answer." Ah-ee said doubtfully. "It doesn't seem appropriate to discuss Old Master's private matters in private, right? Old Master hates this the most. If he finds out that I'm talking too much, wouldn't it be?" "Don't worry. Just say it. You don't have to worry about what happens after that." Ah-ee rubbed his chin and recalled. Then, he sighed helplessly. "Old Master has a lot of women around him." Ah-ee said. Uncle Fu didn't give up and asked, "How many are close to him?" "Not many." Ah-ee shrugged and said calmly, "Master has many women around him, but he doesn't have a close relationship with any of them. Most of it happened in one night." "Uncle Fu, you know it too. Master didn't care about women at all. Even if he had a lot of women, it was just a biological need. He's a man after all. Moreover, you also know that Old Master doesn't believe in marriage. He said that he won't marry. Therefore, his marriage has always been a sore point for the entire family. Aren't there any special exceptions?" Ah-ee shook his head. "No." Fu Bo sighed. He felt that he couldn't make sense of the situation. Ah-ee glanced at his expression, but tactfully did not ask further. An hour later, Gu Jinglian actually came back. He went to investigate the scene and saw that there were no major problems, so he went back home. As soon as he returned to the Gu family, the first question he asked was, "Did you send that brat back?" However, his subordinate reported that Uncle Fu had just brought that little fellow back to the Gu family. "Call that old man over." Gu Jinglian felt a wave of annoyance in his heart. He casually pulled at his collar and went upstairs. Uncle Fu hurried to the study. Gu Jinglian went straight to the point and questioned him, "Why did you bring that brat back again?" Chapter 2757. The police station verified it again. They used your hair and the blood samples collected from Xiao Bao Chu for a paternity test. The final report showed that you and Chu Xiao Bao are related. What? Gu Jinglian found it hard to accept such a conclusion. He stood up in shock and stared at him with a gloomy expression. "Where did you get the hair?" "On your pillow. The doctor said that fortunately, there were hair follicles left in your hair. Therefore, such a test report is valid." Gu Jinglian's expression froze for a moment. He frowned slightly. "Don't joke about such things." "Old Master, how could I joke about such things?" Uncle Fu said with an aggrieved expression. "The truth is right in front of us. From the first time I saw this child, I had some suspicions. Old Master, didn't you notice? This child looks a lot like you. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility of some kind of coincidence. However, this child's facial features are not only similar to yours. Even the expression he sometimes shows is extremely similar to yours. What confirmed my suspicions was the news from the police station that day. They collected Xiao Baochu's DNA and compared it with the national gene pool. In the end, the only match that matched him was you. What? Gu Jinglian felt that this was simply a fantasy. There were countless jaw-dropping coincidences in the world. But it was hard to imagine that such a coincidence would fall on his head. So, Xiao Baochu was his child. How could it be? No matter what kind of relationship he had with the women, he would always take strict precautions. He did not like children. In fact, it could even be said that he was sick of them. He would never let any woman have the chance to bear his child. Even if there was a fish that escaped the net, those greedy women who were pregnant with his child would definitely come knocking on his door with great fanfare. In the name of the child, they would use any means necessary to demand an astronomical amount of child support. How could they hide in such a small city with the child and secretly raise the child until he was 5 years old without alerting the Gu family? Ridiculous. Nonsense. Uncle Fu sighed, Master, there are some things that you can't deny even if you don't admit it. Chu Xiaobao must be your flesh and blood. Gu Jinglian suddenly looked at him deeply, then curled his lips coldly and said, This report doesn't count if I'm not present. Unless you do it again and I see the results with my own eyes, only then will I believe you. Uncle Fu said, Master, if you want, you can go to the hospital for a detailed test right away. Before he could finish, there was a small movement at the door. Gu Jinglian sensed that someone was eavesdropping at the door. He shouted coldly, Who's at the door? Ah, a tender voice came from the door. Chu Xiaobao stood at the door with an aggrieved expression. He nervously pinched the corner of his clothes. Just now, he had secretly followed behind Uncle Fu. He didn't dare to go in, so he hid at the door and eavesdropped. However, he couldn't understand what they were talking about. She could vaguely hear that this annoying bad uncle seemed to be yelling at Uncle Fu. Chapter 2758. Gu Jinglian saw his guilty look and frowned. Why are you hiding at the door? Chu Xiaobao stammered for a while and suddenly said, Don't blame Uncle. I'll definitely return the money he used to buy clothes for me when I grow up and earn money. What did he mean? Gu Jinglian was baffled by her words. Uncle Fu's heart warmed. So this little guy was worried that he would be scolded by old master for spending money on him, so he secretly followed him. Although there was some misunderstanding, this child's kindness still warmed his heart. Gu Jinglian was a little impatient, but for some reason, he couldn't help but take a few more glances at this little guy. He saw him standing there with a wronged and indignant expression, pinching the corner of his shirt and looking at him uneasily. Suddenly, he sat back at the table and waved at him. Come here. What? Come here. Xiao Bao was a little shocked. This bad uncle was calling him. But he looked so fierce. Was he going to scold him? With such a fearful heart, Xiao Bao didn't dare to move forward for a while. Uncle Fu saw that he seemed to be very afraid of Gu Jinglian and smiled helplessly. Then he said, Xiao Bao, Uncle is calling you over. But, don't be afraid. I'm here, aren't I? Uncle Fu encouraged him. Xiao Bao bit his lip. Then he mustered up his courage and slowly walked over to Gu Jinglian. He stood still and lowered his head guiltily, not even daring to look at him. Gu Jinglian scrutinized him carefully, from his eyebrows to his small nose and exquisite facial features. He looked at every detail carefully. He couldn't help but reach out his hand. However, before he could touch him, his sudden movement startled the little guy. Xiao Bao saw him suddenly reach out his hand from the corner of his eye and thought that this bad uncle was going to hit him. He was so frightened that he immediately hugged his head and squatted on the ground, crying out loud. Don't hit me. Gu Jinglian's lips instantly twitched. Who wanted to hit him? Why did this little guy become so timid? In the beginning, he had been wandering alone in the wilderness for so long, but he had never seen him cry. He had even been so bold as to climb into his car. Why had he become so timid now? He had only reached out his hand, and he had already been scared to this extent. Uncle Fu wanted to laugh, but his heart ached at the same time. It was probably because of Gu Jinglian's harsh words that night that the little guy was scared out of his wits. Hence, when he stood in front of Gu Jinglian, he could not help but feel paranoid and jittery. Xiao Bao, be good. Uncle isn't going to hit you. Xiao Bao raised his head. There were still a few drops of tears on his face. Seeing that Gu Jinglian was staring at him coldly, as if he really didn't want to hit him and didn't look as fierce as he remembered, Xiao Bao stood up, trembling all over, but his shoulders were still trembling. Uncle, you said not to hit me. The little guy said sobbingly. Gu Jinglian took a deep breath to calm his emotions. He deliberately eased his tone and said lightly, come here. Let Uncle take a good look at you. Woo, Xiao Bao was a little unwilling. Uncle Fu saw this and gently pushed him from behind. Only then did Xiao Bao pout and walk in front of Gu Jinglian. He raised his head but didn't dare to look into his eyes. Chapter 27:59. Gu Jinglian looked at him up close and reached out his hand. His slender fingers slowly caressed every inch of his facial features. His fingertips gently rubbed his brows and eyes, and he couldn't help but stare blankly. He hadn't looked at him seriously before, but now that he was looking at him up close, he suddenly realized that it was no wonder that Uncle Fu was suspicious. This child did look like him when he was young. But, his child? Was it possible? Then, who was his mother? Uncle. Why do you keep staring at me? Xiao Bao tilted his head and asked, puzzled. Gu Jinglian was silent. Behind him, Uncle Fu smiled and said, Xiao Bao, haven't you always said that you want to find your father? Xiao Bao turned around and exchanged glances with Uncle Fu. He nodded vigorously. Yeah. Xiao Bao didn't have a father since he was young. Mommy doesn't know where Daddy is either, but Mommy said that Xiao Bao has a father. It's just that they were temporarily separated for some reason. Xiao Bao has always wanted to find his father. Uncle Fu asked deliberately, if you really find your father, are you willing to acknowledge him? Yes, yes. Xiao Bao nodded vigorously. If I can find my father, of course I'm willing to acknowledge him. Because he's my father. Without my father, there wouldn't be a Xiao Bao. Uncle Fu smiled in relief. He walked forward and picked him up. Then he gestured, Xiao Bao, Uncle will tell you a secret, okay? Okay. Xiao Bao went forward. Uncle Fu leaned close to his ear and whispered, your father is right in front of you. What do you mean? Xiao Bao couldn't wrap his head around it for a while. Uncle Fu gestured with his eyes. This uncle is your father. The afternoon sun was glaring and vicious. Even though it was only April, the weather was gradually turning hot. There seemed to be no transition between winter and summer as it quietly arrived without warning. Mu Yansheng and his entourage arrived in the capital. According to the clues and coordinates provided by Luo Qing, they quickly found the exact location. Just as the clues provided by them were, there was indeed a very well-hidden industrial area in the suburbs. This industrial area was built in the last century. They found the warehouse, and when they walked over, they saw breadcrumbs and broken chairs scattered on the ground. Chu Ho walked over and squatted on the ground. She gently rubbed the breadcrumbs. She walked over to the broken chair and looked at it. The chair was made of solid wood. After years of being exposed to the wind and sun, many parts of the warehouse were already moldy and decayed. It could be easily broken with a gentle twist. Luo Qing said that the warehouse is very humid, so they used a chair to tie baby Chu up. From the looks of it, it should be here, she said. Chu Ho frowned and said slowly, but Xiao Bao isn't here. Where could he have gone? Could Song Enya have brought him back? Meng Qingxue asked worriedly. Impossible. Mu Yanqing said, since this child isn't the one she wants, she won't take the risk to bring him back. After all, it won't do her any good to harm a child. She won't do anything to Xiao Bao. A woman like her is ruthless. What won't she do? Meng Qingxue said hatefully. Chapter 2760. Chu Ho suddenly stood up, turned around, and looked around before saying calmly, "Xiao Bao should be fine." Mu Yanqing was stunned. "What do you mean?" Meng Qingxue was surprised to hear this. "Chu Ho, how can you be so sure? Did you see this chair?" Chu Ho kicked the wreckage of the chair on the ground expressionlessly and said slowly, "Didn't Luo Qing say that they left after tying Xiao Bao to the chair? I looked at the scene and didn't see any signs of an intense fight. I originally thought that Xiao Bao had been taken away by that woman. However, when I saw this chair, I could infer that that woman was probably like Luo Qing and Luo Hao. She didn't care about the child and just left." Meng Qingxue walked to Chu Ho's side and looked down at the chair on the ground. It seemed to have suffered a huge impact and was broken into pieces. She was a little puzzled. "What happened to this chair? Do you see it? The chair is broken into pieces, but do you see here? There are traces of handcuffs here. Judging from these traces, the little guy was probably tied to the chair and wanted to escape, so he dragged the chair to the wall. Then, he turned his back and slammed into the wall to break the chair. This chair looks very sturdy, but after being exposed to the wind and sun for so many years, coupled with being soaked in water, it has long rotted and broken. Maybe the little guy was left here alone and thought of this way to get away." After Chu Ho explained in detail, Meng Qingxue came to a realization. "I understand what you mean. In other words, Xiao Bao didn't get into an accident." "That's true, but that might not be the case." Chu He frowned. She turned around, walked to the door, and looked around. This was the suburbs, remote and desolate. Even if she could escape from here, she was only a 5-year-old child. How could she leave this place on her own? After arriving in the capital, Chu Ho noticed along the way that this place was barren and there was no sign of human habitation. Even an adult would have to walk for 3 days and 3 nights to leave such a desolate place. With Xiao Bao's leg strength, there was no way he could walk out of here. Chu Ho frowned and clenched her fists tightly. For a moment, she felt a little lost. She wanted to find Xiao Bao, but she did not know how to do it. In the huge capital, finding a child was like finding a needle in a haystack. She did not dare to think in a bad way, but it was not that she was not worried that Xiao Bao might have encountered an accident in this wilderness. If it were any other woman, she would probably be so helpless that she would break down in despair and wail at this time, but Chu Ho did not. Meng Qingxue said, "Why don't we call the police?" "Call the police?" Mu Yanqing snorted. "Haven't you seen the efficiency of the police? Call the police? There won't be any clues at all. But it's better than just sitting there and not doing anything." Meng Qingxue, however, disagreed. What if Baby Chu meets a kind-hearted person on his way out and sends him to the police station to file a report? Who knows, we might be able to get some leads by calling the police. Chapter 2761. Chu Ho also silently agreed with this suggestion. Even if Xiao Bao had really met with an accident, they could still get news from him by calling the police. If there was no news, it would probably be the best news. In short, they should contact the local police station first and file a record. What if there was a lead? With such hope, Chu Ho picked up her phone and dialed the police station's number. After connecting to the police station, she recorded Xiao Bao's basic characteristics and some information, waiting for a slim chance of survival. Just as the group was driving towards the city center, Chu Ho suddenly received a call from the police station. "Hello, are you Miss Chu? I'm from the Jianghu District Public Security Bureau. Previously, the call center received a report from you saying that your son was missing. The name you provided was Xiao Bao Chu, right?" "Yes." Hearing this, Chu Ho was a little excited. She held the phone tightly and asked, "Excuse me, is there any news from your side?" "Oh, it's like this. This name was not found in the household registration center. However, I checked online. Previously, the Shangguan Public Security Bureau also received a report that a child was missing and entrusted to the Public Security Bureau to find his family. However, 10 minutes ago, the family called to close the case. Apparently, the child has already found his family. What? Chu Ho's expression froze for a moment. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted together. Officer, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. How could it be? Chu Ho was a little unsteady on her feet. For a moment, many doubts arose in her mind. She clenched her teeth tightly and said with difficulty, could it be a false claim? She had seen on the news that some criminals would pretend to be the child's family and claim the child. Previously, there was such a blunder in Sea City. Due to the negligence of a few police officers at the Public Security Bureau, the child was falsely claimed by an unrelated stranger and was then abducted and sold to a remote mountain area. Fortunately, it was discovered in time, and through the police station's surveillance cameras, they had a detailed picture of the child's facial features. The police officer immediately said, "That's impossible." The information on the case said that the child and his family had undergone a DNA test and confirmed that they were related. That's why the case was closed. Chu Ho's face suddenly turned ugly. However, we can't rule out the possibility that it's a coincidence of names. After all, other than providing names and general information, you didn't provide any other strong clues. Is it convenient for you to come to the police station now? Collect DNA information and then do a detailed investigation. Perhaps it was just a coincidence. However, please rest assured that the DNA information of the child is basically consistent with his father's. If the blood relationship is not confirmed, we can't just close the case casually. Chu Ho hung up the phone with a complicated look on his face. For a moment, it was as if there were countless inexplicable threads crazily rushing to the center of his eyebrows, giving him a splitting headache. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows, but her forehead had unknowingly started to sweat. Meng Qingxue saw that she looked terrible and couldn't help but walk up to her worriedly. She asked anxiously, Chu Ho, is there any news from Xiaobao? Chapter 2762. The police said that there was indeed a child named Chu Xiaobao, who got lost and was sent to the Public Security Bureau. However, after an investigation, his family members claimed him and the case was closed. Family members? Meng Qingxue was shocked. How is that possible? I think it's very strange too. This is simply a fantasy. Chu Ho said. Mu Yanqing said from the side, it's useless to say so much now. Calm down. We might as well go to the police station to take a look. It's better than being flustered here. For the first time, Chu Ho did not refute and only nodded. The car drove toward the Jianghu District Public Security Bureau. The Jianghu District Public Security Bureau was not far from the highway intersection. The intersection of the highway intersection and the provincial road was the only road that led to the suburbs, which was the abandoned industrial area. Jianghu District was in charge of the jurisdiction of this area. Therefore, after 20 minutes, Chu Ho arrived at the police station. Mu Yanqing was in charge of parking the car while Meng Qingxue followed closely behind Chu Ho into the police station. The police officer in charge of the case received them. The police officer had already printed out the documents for the record and explained it concisely. That child is 120 centimeters tall and looks very delicate. He's about 5 years old. As the household registration center couldn't find his file, he probably wasn't registered on the household register. Just 3 days ago, a middle-aged man brought him to the police station to report a case. He said that the child was lost and asked the police to find his family members. However, after searching hard, they couldn't find any information about the child. After that, the child's DNA was collected and sent to the DNA database for comparison. 3 days ago? Chu Ho frowned. The timing was basically the same. But where was Xiaobao before the case was reported? Where was the child found? Chu Ho asked. The police officer shook his head and said, he didn't say. The person who reported the case only said that he accidentally picked him up on the road. At that time, it was very late and the child was alone on the road in the suburbs. He seemed to have gotten lost from his family. Then, didn't you say that you collected the child's DNA and sent it to the database for comparison? Chu Ho paused and asked nervously, did you get any results? The police officer only said, there are no notes on the details. They only said that the child's father had been found and brought the child home. The case has been closed. That's my child. Chu Ho said confidently, if it's really as described in this case, then all the characteristics are consistent, and the time of disappearance is also consistent, then that child is my son. His name was Xiao Bao Chu. Officer, can you help me find my child? It's naturally impossible to rely on your one-sided statement. Is it convenient for you to do a DNA test? If the information matches, we'll take you to the child. Chu Ho gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. He forced himself to calm down and asked, then, the premise is that if something goes wrong and the man is not related to the child, can the child's safety be guaranteed? The child's safety will definitely be guaranteed. Don't worry about that. Okay. Chu Ho nodded. Then I'll try my best to cooperate with you. Don't worry. As long as you cooperate with us to collect the DNA information, we'll give you a reply immediately. Chapter 2763. On the other side, Xiao Bao, who also felt that this world was extremely mysterious, stood in front of Gu Jinglian in a daze. His eyes were dull and his face was full of doubt. He looked at Gu Jinglian, then carefully looked at Uncle Fu. It took him a long time to digest Uncle Fu's words. He looked at Gu Jinglian again, his eyes full of doubt and fear. He couldn't help but walk in front of Uncle Fu and grumble, "Uncle, this joke isn't funny at all. How can this bad uncle be my father?" Uncle Fu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He squatted down, held his shoulder, and said very seriously, "Xiao Bao, Uncle isn't joking with you. This is your father? He doesn't look like my father at all." Feeling aggrieved, Baby Chu pinched the corner of his shirt tightly, clearly unwilling to do so. No matter how he looked at it, this uncle was bad. He was like a demon king, black-bellied and terrifying. Just one look was enough to make one's hair stand on end and shudder. In his imagination, his father was an extremely imposing figure. He was tall, gentle, handsome, and made people feel very safe. However, this uncle seemed to have a handsome and tall image. He was satisfied, but this gentleness, his temper was obviously very bad. Moreover, he was fierce and glared at him viciously. He was not gentlemanly at all. Naturally, he couldn't accept this fact. Similarly, Gu Jinglian felt extremely awkward. A little child had appeared out of nowhere. All kinds of evidence proved that this 5-year-old kid in front of him was his flesh and blood. For a moment, he was a little confused and gloomy. He didn't have the awareness of a father at all. When it came to children, other than annoyance and disgust, he didn't have any patience. Therefore, even though the entire Gu family had great enthusiasm and hope for his lifelong happiness, to him, he didn't believe in marriage. It was just that he didn't want children. However, this little kid fell from the sky and was pushed in front of him by Uncle Fu to call him father. He panicked and was at a loss for some reason. He was already feeling conflicted. Looking at Xiao Bao, he was also looking at him awkwardly. He was also very unwilling to acknowledge this father of his. The father and son stood face to face. The awkwardness between them was exactly the same. Gu Jinglian snorted, still in disbelief. He suddenly said, "How can my son be so stupid?" Xiao Bao Chu heard him. Not only did he hear it, but he also understood it. He was so angry that his little face twisted. He glared at him fiercely and put his hands on his hips in defiance. Then, he pouted and glared at him. He said arrogantly, "My father can't be so fierce. I won't admit that you're my father." His face was full of disdain. The repulsion in his eyes was even more obvious. Gu Jinglian was furious and glared at him. If Xiao Bao Chu wasn't used to his cold and threatening gaze, he would have been trembling in fear. However, after these 2 days of interaction, he had gotten used to Gu Jinglian's bad temper. He also gradually got used to his cold expression. He was no longer afraid. Instead, he raised his eyebrows and said provocatively, "Why are you glaring at me? You don't want to acknowledge me, but I don't want to acknowledge you." "Humph. You. Chapter 2764. Gu Jinglian was so angry that he was at a loss for words. He cursed fiercely in his heart. Brat! He had learned how to be fierce with his mouth. Uncle Fu immediately gave Gu Jinglian a look. He squatted down and patiently coaxed. Xiao Bao, didn't you say that you really wanted a father? Now that you found a father, why are you saying that you don't want one anymore? He's not the kind of father I want. Xiao Bao said angrily. Besides, not only does this uncle look fierce, he obviously doesn't like me at all. Why should I stick my warm buttocks to his cold face? Pfft, stick my warm buttocks to his cold face? Uncle Fu couldn't help but be amused by Xiao Bao's innocent and amusing behavior. As Xiao Bao complained, he looked at Gu Jinglian with a resentful gaze, as if he was silently mocking him with his eyes. Gu Jinglian wasn't a good-natured person. He threatened, if you look at me again, do you believe that I'll dig your eyeballs out? Xiao Bao immediately pursed his lips and shrank back behind Uncle Fu. His two little hands grabbed the corner of Uncle Fu's shirt in fear. However, he relied on Uncle Fu's presence and was certain that Gu Jinglian wouldn't dare to do anything to him. He continued to provoke him, dig if you can. Humph. Big baddie. I won't be threatened by you. Xiao Bao is a brave man. I'm not afraid. Oh. Gu Jinglian smiled mischievously. He strode over to Uncle Fu and suddenly reached out. He grabbed Xiao Bao's collar and pulled him over. Ah! Xiao Bao cried out in alarm. Before he could dodge, and before Uncle Fu could stop him, Gu Jinglian had already lifted him up. Coincidentally, Uncle Fu had specially bought a pair of suspenders for Xiao Bao today. Gu Jinglian's strength was frightening. With just a little bit of force, he grabbed his collar and lifted him up easily. Gu Jinglian looked straight at him. His eyes were cold and sharp, as if they were going to devour his soul. Xiao Bao swallowed nervously. However, he saw Gu Jinglian's lips curl into a cold smile. He said coldly, look at you. You're so arrogant. Do you really think I don't dare? Xiao Bao's shoulders couldn't help but tremble. He didn't dare to struggle. He just bit his trembling lips tightly, and his eyes gradually moistened. He probably knew that he was afraid. He really thought that Gu Jinglian was a man of his word, and that he wasn't just bluffing. But even though he was afraid, so afraid that his whole body was trembling, Xiao Bao still pretended to be brave and clenched his fists. His teary eyes tried hard to widen as he stared at Gu Jinglian. Even though tears kept rolling in his eyes, he tried hard to force himself to not show any cowardly expression in front of Gu Jinglian. Instead, he pretended to be calm and said, I'm not afraid. You're taller than me and stronger than me. You can bully me, and I can't beat you. But I won't beg you for mercy, and I won't be afraid. Because Mom said that Xiao Bao is the bravest child. After saying that, Xiao Bao clenched his fists even tighter. His expression was solemn as if he was facing death calmly. However, no matter how hard he tried to show how majestic his spirit was, his trembling voice still betrayed him in the end. You're afraid, Gu Jinglian said lightly. Chapter 2765. Xiao Bao snorted coldly and flashed his clenched fists as if to show off his strength. I'm not afraid. Didn't you say you were going to gouge out my eyes? Just do it. I won't beg for mercy, and I won't cry out in pain. Oh. Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. Then, he moved his shoulders and raised his hands slightly. Unexpectedly, his simple action of raising his hand completely frightened Xiao Bao, who was on the verge of panic. He finally couldn't suppress the fear in his heart. He covered his eyes tightly with both hands and gritted his teeth. Tears of fear flowed continuously through the gaps between his fingers and rolled down his face. However, he gritted his teeth and tried hard not to cry out loud. His trembling shoulders silently betrayed the fear in his heart at that moment. Uncle Fu couldn't stand it anymore. He immediately walked forward and snatched the child from Gu Jinglian's hands. He was a little angry. Old master, Xiao Bao is still young. You can't scare him like this. The child is so young. He can't be scared at all. Isn't he very stubborn? Gu Jinglian disagreed. Since he's my son, how can he be so pretentious? Old master. Uncle Fu said helplessly, don't you feel sorry for Xiaobao? Gu Jinglian glanced at him. His gaze was unreadable. Feel sorry for him? Uncle Fu was about to say something, but on second thought, old master's reaction was only because he wasn't mentally prepared for his son. Men were different from women. A woman's latent maternal instincts would be immediately aroused by the birth of a child. However, men were different. Gu Jinglian was even more so. Since he was young, his concept of family was very weak. Moreover, he didn't have any feelings for this child. He was no different from a stranger. It was indeed ridiculous for him to immediately acknowledge this child from the bottom of his heart. His indifferent reaction couldn't be more normal. Uncle Fu asked seriously, Old Master, what do you plan to do with this child? Gu Jinglian sized him up and said indifferently, it's up to you. In that case, can we keep Xiaobao in the Gu family? Uncle Fu's eyes lit up. Chu Xiaobao seemed to have understood something. His whole body trembled as he said, I don't want to. Xiaobao. I don't want to be with this uncle. He's a bad guy. He's not my father. He wants to dig out my eyes. He's a demon king. Great demon king. After Chu Xiaobao shouted herself hoarse from complaining, she could no longer hold back her grievances and sobbed, I want to go home, I miss my mother, I want my mother. Woo-woo. I want to go home. Chu Xiaobao didn't listen to any of Uncle Fu's kind words at all. He rubbed his eyes pitifully with his little hands and cried sadly. Actually, from the first time he met Gu Jinglian, Xiaobao liked this uncle from the bottom of his heart. At that time, Gu Jinglian took him to eat KFC. His heart was filled with anticipation. If such a handsome and nice uncle was his biological father, how happy would he be? Ever since he was born, he didn't have a father. His yearning for a father was definitely not a simple fantasy. However, a child's heart was delicate and extremely sensitive. During this period of time together, he deeply understood that this uncle didn't like him. Moreover, he really hated him. Chapter 2766. Chu Xiaobao felt wronged. He didn't want his father anymore. As long as he had his mother, that would be enough. Just as he lowered his head, sobbing and feeling extremely sad and lonely, his helpless appearance finally touched the only soft spot in Gu Jinglian's heart. He actually didn't want to acknowledge this child who appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't mentally prepared for a child who appeared out of nowhere and claimed to be his son. He didn't want to acknowledge and accept it. But blood was thicker than water. After all, he was his own flesh and blood. Gu Jinglian wasn't cold to the point of being heartless, especially when he saw Xiaobao's teary eyes. A taut string in his mind finally snapped. It seemed that because of his helpless appearance, his heart finally softened. Thus, he reached out his large palm and gently rubbed Chu Xiaobao's neat bangs. Don't cry. He was a little helpless. He looked at Xiaobao and frowned. He wanted to comfort him like a father, but because of his pride, he couldn't bring himself to do so. However, it wasn't right for this child to cry like this. If he didn't restrain him, he reckoned that he wouldn't be able to have a peaceful night. Forget it. Why should he lower himself to the same level as a child? Should he coax him a little? But how could he coax a child? He was a new official and didn't have any experience. Gu Jinglian looked at Xiaobao gloomily for a long time. After deliberating for a while, he said this with an awkward expression, don't cry. Don't you know that you look ugly when you cry? Baby Chu blinked his teary eyes and suddenly cried even louder with a loud, wah. How was this coaxing a child? Uncle Fu broke out in cold sweat. He said, Master, this isn't how you coax a child. If you say this, the child will only cry more sadly. Gu Jinglian's expression was awkward for a moment. Then, he glared at him coldly. Who's coaxing him? I just feel that his crying is annoying. Uncle Fu's lips twitched violently. He could tell that Gu Jinglian was not without a trace of heartache. Although he said that he was annoyed by baby Chu's cries, it was definitely not that he did not feel any heartache. However, Gu Jinglian had always been so arrogant and unyielding. It was absolutely impossible for him to bow his head to a child. Uncle Fu sighed. Hence, he carried the crying child to Gu Jinglian and said sternly, "Master, please hug him." Gu Jinglian looked at baby Chu in disgust, who was nestled in Butler Fu's arms and crying pitifully with tears and snot all over his face. His forehead turned green. To him, even though he was usually able to call the wind and summon the rain, no matter how troublesome the matter was, it couldn't compare to standing in front of a child at this moment. The child was such a fragile little thing. His entire body was soft and chubby. He was like a glassware that would break easily with a drop. He didn't even know where to pick him up. "Master, children are very easy to coax. Just hug and coax him, and he won't cry anymore. Xiao Bao is still young. You can't be fierce to him. Since you're Xiao Bao's father, then you should at least take up the responsibility of a father." Responsibility of a father? Chapter 2767. Chu Xiaobao realized that he had already left Uncle Fu's embrace. He looked up and saw Gu Jinglian's disdainful and gloomy eyes. His tears fell even more violently. "Boo-hoo. I don't want you to carry me." Xiaobao turned his head and reached out his small hands to Uncle Fu. He waved them continuously and pleaded, "I don't want him to carry me, boo-hoo. I don't want him to carry me." Uncle Fu could not bear to see him like this. However, he looked at Xiao Bao and knew that the most important thing now was to nurture the relationship between the father and son. Hence, he hardened his heart, turned around, and strode out of the room. With a bang, the door was closed. In the huge room, only Gu Jinglian and Xiao Bao were left. Xiao Bao cried even more helplessly. Once Uncle Fu left, Gu Jinglian became a little unrestrained. Hearing Xiao Bao's cries, he said fiercely, "If you cry again, I won't go easy on you." Although Xiao Bao felt wronged and afraid, such a threat was extremely effective. He stopped crying immediately. Just now, when Uncle Fu was present, he dared to challenge Gu Jinglian because of Uncle Fu. Now that Uncle Fu had left, his only support was gone. He did not dare to be rash. With Gu Jinglian's threat, he learned to be obedient. He pursed his lips and did not make a sound. Now, there was only him and this bad uncle in the room. He had no one to rely on and no one to back him up. Hence, he should not push his luck and stop while he was ahead. Gu Jinglian did not know whether to laugh or cry at the fact that she was amenable to the soft but afraid of the hard. "You've learned your lesson." When Gu Jinglian saw that he finally stopped crying, he was naturally satisfied. He thought in his heart that he should not spoil the child. When it was time to be fierce, he should be fierce. See, with just one shout, he immediately stopped. He carried Chu Xiaobao to the sofa and sat on the side. He saw Chu Xiaobao staring at him innocently, trembling in fear as he leaned against the corner of the sofa, timidly looking at his face. Such a young child actually knew how to read people's expressions. Seeing that Gu Jinglian's face was no longer as gloomy as before, Chu Xiaobao's wildly beating heart finally calmed down. Chu Xiaobao silently thought in his heart, how can he return to his mother's side? After thinking about it, he looked at Gu Jinglian again. Crying and throwing a tantrum wouldn't work, so the little guy decided to use a stalling tactic. Thus, he pursed his lips and said carefully, "Uncle, let's make up, okay? I won't be angry with you anymore. Don't be fierce to me, okay?" Gu Jinglian glanced at him faintly and hummed, taking it as a tacit agreement to the man's suggestion of reconciliation. "Then, let's make up." As Xiao Bao said this, he reached out his little hand and clumsily wiped the tears from his face. His eyes darted around and suddenly asked tentatively, "Uncle said that you're my father. Is that true? Or is he joking?" Gu Jinglian narrowed his eyes slightly. He did not know what this little guy was up to. Thus, he casually crossed his legs and elegantly stretched his posture, admitting, "It's true. No way. Chu Xiaobao naturally did not believe him. He asked suspiciously, "You're not lying to me, are you?" Chapter 2768. As he spoke, he thought to himself that although this uncle looked very handsome, he was so fierce and had such a bad personality. He definitely could not find a wife. His mother said that many men could not find a wife, so they had no choice but to buy children from human traffickers at a high price. Some of these children were abducted, and some were cheated. Therefore, he was certain that this uncle could not have children, so he lied to him and said that he was his father. Yes. That must be it. Gu Jinglian's eyes twitched when he heard this. Could not find a wife? Physically weak? Unable to have children? Could it be that this brat was implying that he had a physical defect? Baby Chu thought that he had hit the nail on the head when he saw the look on his uncle's face. Hence, he tried to console him in all seriousness. "Uncle, it's actually not that embarrassing to have some physical defects. You don't have to feel inferior. Maybe there's still hope for a baby? But I can't be your son. I still have my mother. If she can't find me, she'll be worried." Gu Jinglian was speechless. Did this kid think that he was lying to him? He frowned and suddenly took out a cigarette box. He lit a cigarette and took a deep puff. Then, he flicked away the ash and said calmly, "What kind of person is your mother?" Quack. The abrupt question stunned him for a moment. "Didn't you say that you want to go back to your mother?" Gu Jinglian continued, "Why don't you tell me your mother's name and what characteristics she has? As long as I know the details, I can help you find her." "Really?" Xiaobao asked excitedly, "Can you really help me find my mother?" "Yes." "That's impossible, right?" Xiaobao quickly regained his senses and looked at him suspiciously. "Even the police can't find my mother. How can you?" "I have a way. They are useless, but I have the ability." Gu Jinglian looked at him from the corner of his eyes. "Of course, if you don't want to tell me, I won't force you." He was retreating in order to advance. The reason why he asked about that woman was because he was curious about the child's mother. It was true that he had many women, but it wasn't like he couldn't count them all. If this guy could provide him with some characteristics, he might be able to think of something. Xiaobao thought about it for a long time. Finally, his eagerness to find his mother overshadowed everything else. He hesitated for a long time before saying, "My mother's name is Chu Ho. She's very tall, thin, and has short black hair. She's a police officer. However, I've heard a lot of people say that my mother wasn't born and raised in Yen City. They all said that when my mother was pregnant with me, she had an accident. 5 years ago, they rescued my mother from the river. At that time, his mother seemed to have suffered a head injury and lost all her memories. She didn't even remember her own name. The name, Chu Ho, was given to me by my mother." After a pause, the little guy continued, "After I was born, my mother worked at a police station and came home very late every day. If I have to talk about some characteristics, my mother is very beautiful. She has a pair of big eyes, a high nose, and a pair of lips that are not too thin or thick." Chapter 2769. Based on the clues provided by Chu Xiaobao, Gu Jinglian formed a portrait in his mind, but he could not remember for a long time that he had been in contact with such a woman. Short hair? Just this point alone was enough to cut off all the clues. Among the women he had been with, none of them had short hair. He liked long hair, dark and waist length. Therefore, among the women he had been with, none of them had short hair. She was very tall and very thin. As a police officer, it meant that she had good skills. However, for Chu Xiaobao, the so-called very tall might not be very tall. Relatively speaking, for a child's field of vision, the concept of very tall was probably between 1.5 to 1.6 meters. The most important point was, previously, through the DNA genetic test at the police station, he could not find her in the DNA information database. This meant that this woman was an illegal resident. There were only a few reasons why she was an illegal resident. Either she had been missing for too long and her household registration had been cancelled. Or she had a special identity, such as a member of the black organization, a black agent, a spy, an assassin, or an undercover agent. Wait. Undercover? Suddenly, a thought flashed through Gu Jinglian's mind. He frowned. In the river of sand in his memory, a woman's cold face flashed past, black shoulder-length hair, exquisite facial features, cold eyebrows, and a kind of boldness that ordinary women did not have. She did not have a name, only a code name, Vermilion Bird. Vermilion Bird, the highest anti-crime inspector of the Interpol. Could it be her? Gu Jinglian was not very clear about this woman's appearance, but vaguely, those exquisite eyebrows seemed to match Xiao Bao's young and tender eyebrows. Gu Jinglian was in a daze for a long time. 6 years ago, this woman was planted by his side as an undercover agent. At that time, when he first came to power, he was ambitious. In order to expand his territory, he was unscrupulous and ruthless. He offended many forces. The Gu family's power continued to expand. In the end, because of the cross-border arms sales, they even built 2 military factories in Vietnam and North America, which alarmed the Interpol. However, at that time, the Gu family had many connections in the capital. Coupled with the protection of the country's government, the Interpol could not do anything to them. At that time, Vermilion Bird was an anti-corruption inspector. She was sent on a mission to infiltrate the Gu family as a spy. She used her methods to get close to him and was ordered to carry out an assassination plan. However, because her identity was exposed and the assassination failed, the Gu family sent people to hunt her down. In the end, she managed to escape and her whereabouts became a mystery. Thinking of this, Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows. His gaze was deep and serene as he collected his thoughts. His gaze was complex. He didn't know that the woman was pregnant with his child. This woman was very powerful. Back then, when she was placed by his side, she did not reveal any flaws. Even he did not notice anything strange about her. However, 5 years ago, his whereabouts were unknown, and his whereabouts were a mystery. In this way, the characteristics of all aspects were basically consistent. He didn't expect it to be her. He thought that she was dead. Interpol also secretly searched for her for a few months, but in the end, they could only conclude that she was dead. After losing their beloved general, the Interpol secretly erased all her information for 100 years. But did she lose her memory? So, she didn't remember anything? Including her memories of him. Chapter 2770. In the police station, Chu Ho sat quietly on the bench, patiently waiting for news. Unknowingly, it was already late. Mu Yanqing settled Meng Qingxue in a hotel. Her body was still weak, and she was exhausted after a day's drive. Although she was a little worried about Xiao Bao's whereabouts, Chu Ho comforted her that even if she stayed at the police station, she might not be able to make any progress. She might as well go back to the hotel to rest first. Meng Qingxue listened to her. Chu Ho waited at the police station for an entire night. The police officer clearly told her that there would not be any progress if she just waited at the police station. The DNA test would take some time. It was already so late, and the hospital had already knocked off, so there would not be any movement. The earliest they could get the DNA test report would be tomorrow morning, when the hospital went back to work. The police station would then send someone to rush them. However, Chu Ho stubbornly stayed at the police station and refused to leave. She firmly believed that she had to know Xiao Bao's whereabouts as soon as possible. Otherwise, no matter how tired she would not be able to sleep in peace. It was a long night. Finally, dawn came. Chu Ho waited for several hours in torment. Finally, at 10:30 a.m., the hospital gave her a reply. The police officer brought her to the hospital and personally collected the report. When she held the report in her hand, Chu Ho looked at the words on the report, confirmed paternity. She finally could not control her surging emotions and her eyes turned red with excitement. It's Xiao Bao. He's still fine. He's still alive and well. Chu Ho was so excited that her shoulders trembled uncontrollably. She thought that he must have met with some mishap, but she had been controlling herself and did not dare to think of the worst. She was afraid that her words would really come true. However, when she learned that Xiao Bao was still alive and well, she was so surprised that she could not believe it. "Officer, have you seen this report?" Chu Ho handed the report to the police officer with a smile on her face. "Since it's confirmed that I'm related to that child, please bring me to him immediately." "Strange." The police officer held the report and muttered with a strange expression. When Chu Ho heard this, she raised her eyebrows and asked in confusion, "What's strange about it? Is this child really your biological son?" The police officer raised his hand and rubbed his chin as he narrowed his eyes. "But I contacted the Shangguan Public Security Bureau yesterday, and they replied that the child was brought back by his biological father. Since you're the child's mother, then, what's the relationship between you and the child's father?" Generally speaking, no matter how abnormal the relationship between a child's mother and father was, a child's mother. In other words, even if they were divorced, the children's parents would still be able to communicate with each other. However, no matter how he looked at it, he felt that this woman's background was somewhat unusual. He bit her lip and said with some difficulty, "Actually, I don't know who the child's biological father is." "What? You don't know?" The police officer was shocked. How is that possible? No matter how careless a woman was, she would still know who the father of her child was, right? Unless it was a one-night stand. After making love with a strange man, she accidentally got pregnant and gave birth to the child. It's true. Chapter 2771. After a pause, Chu-hee added, "Later, I found out that I was pregnant, but I lost all my memories of who the child was, who the father was, and what my relationship with that man was. I can't remember even the slightest bit." "You didn't try hard to remember?" "It's no use." Chu Ho shook her head, looking exhausted. "I racked my brains, but I still couldn't remember. The doctor said that I lost my memory because my head was severely injured. There was a blood clot in my brain, and it had congealed into a blood clot that pressed on my nerves. In addition, subconsciously, I didn't want to recall that past. However, if the blood clot eventually disappeared, there was a possibility that I could regain my memory." The police officer said suspiciously, "But the strange thing was that I couldn't find any information about you in the database. Even the household registration center couldn't get your file. What kind of special identity did you have in the past? So special that all the networks couldn't find out who you were." Chu Ho said, "I really don't remember. What my identity was, who I was, and what happened in the past, I don't care about it." As she said that, she walked in front of him and held his shoulders tightly. "I just want to see my son right now. Didn't you say that as long as the DNA report confirms our parent-child relationship, you'll be able to bring me to him?" The police officer was stunned for a moment, then nodded silently. "Calm down, don't be agitated. Don't worry, the child is very safe. Come back to the police station with me later. I'll help you contact him and bring you to see him." "Okay." Chu Ho smiled, and her expression finally relaxed. However, perhaps it was because she hadn't slept well for a few days, but Chu Ho's complexion was really bad. Her eyelids were dark, and her face was ashen. There was no color in her face. He couldn't help but worry. "Do you want to have a good rest? You don't look well." "No need." Chu Ho waved her hand. "I'm fine." The police officer was kind. "Madam Chu, if you ask me, your body is your own. You haven't slept for a few days, right? If this goes on, your body will be exhausted. Even if it's for the child, you have to take good care of your body." He sucked in a deep breath of cold air and turned around abruptly. Staring at him with bloodshot eyes, she asked, "Have you ever had a child? Do you know the pain of being separated from your own flesh and blood?" She continued to push him. The police officer stared at her blankly. Chu Ho's shoulders heaved uncontrollably. Over the past few days, he had been scared witless, restless, and worried about Xiao Bao's whereabouts. Coupled with the fact that he hadn't slept for a few days and his physical exhaustion, he vented all of his frustrations. For the past 5 years, Xiao Bao has never left my side. He must be very scared and helpless right now. He must want to see me immediately. I miss him very much too. I'm very worried about him. No matter how much you emphasize to me that he's safe and not in danger, I also hope to appear in front of him in the next second to comfort him, protect him, and not let him be frightened. You're a police officer. What you have to do is to help me find the child immediately, not. Chu Ho's blood rushed to her heart. Halfway through her sentence, there was a destructive darkness in front of her, and her body swayed lightly. Chapter 2772. When Meng Qingxue heard the news, she rushed to the hospital with Mu Yancheng. When they reached the door of the ward, they pushed it open and rushed in. They saw Chu Ho lying sickly on the bed. Her face was pale and weak, and there was no sign of life. It was as if her body was already an empty shell. Meng Qingxue rushed to the bed anxiously, only to see Chu Ho lying on the bed. Even though she was unconscious, her brows were tightly knitted, as if she was immersed in great pain. The doctor was holding a clipboard by the bed and writing something silently. Meng Qingxue walked over and lowered her voice. She asked in a panic, "Doctor, what's wrong with her? Why does she look so weak? What's going on?" When the doctor heard this, he could not help but turn to look at them. After sizing them up for a while, he asked, "Are you the patient's family members?" "Yes." Meng Qingxue replied without thinking. The doctor nodded. 3 hours ago, the patient was sent to the hospital. After a checkup, we found that her body is very weak. Preliminary diagnosis is that she has not had good rest for a long time and is physically exhausted. Furthermore, she has very serious anemia. Moreover, after a brain CT scan, we found that there is a large blood clot in the patient's head that is pressing on the cranial nerves. Is it very serious? Meng Qingxue asked worriedly. As the patient's family member, don't you know about her physical condition? Her condition is very serious. She needs immediate surgery to drain the blood clot. The doctor was a little surprised. Meng Qingxue shook her head. I only know that she suffered a serious head injury due to an accident and lost all her memories. The patient has amnesia? Yes. The doctor pondered for a moment before saying, it's probably because the blood clot is pressing on the nerves. I suggest immediate surgery. Meng Qingxue sucked in a breath of cold air, obviously a little shocked. Surgery? Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Don't tell me we need a craniotomy. In her impression, any surgery that required moving the brain was a craniotomy. However, such a surgery was too risky. When the time comes, a few surgical plans will be given. It also depended on the specific location of the blood clot. If it was in the brain or the internal capsule, it would definitely require a craniotomy, which was also very risky. However, if the location of the blood clot is relatively shallow, we can also perform a minimally invasive surgery to remove the hematoma through ventriculoscopy. Minimally invasive? Is it an incision on the surface of the head? The doctor nodded. Yeah, that's pretty much it. What if we don't do the surgery? There are countless possible risks, but for the time being, we can't determine the specifics. Some patients insisted on not undergoing surgery because the location of the blood clot was more dangerous. It pressed on the nerves and skull. There were also some patients who died of sudden cerebral hemorrhage. There were also cases where the blood clot slowly disappeared after more than 10 years. Everyone's physique was different, and the situations they encountered were also different. However, to be safe, surgery was still recommended. If it presses on other nerves in the future, it will be difficult to determine the unknown risk. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists, frowned slightly, and asked, how long will it take to prepare for the operation? If you are well prepared, the operation can be carried out the day after tomorrow. However, the family member's signature is required. Chapter 2773. At night, there was a sudden thunderstorm. A white light suddenly flashed outside the window, followed by a thunderclap. Chu Xiaobao was awakened from his sleep by the sound of thunder. He was so frightened that he cried out loud. "Mom," he had a nightmare. He dreamed that Chu Ho was standing in front of him, but she looked like a stranger. She looked at him as if she did not know him and was a stranger. He panicked and wailed. He hugged her, but she pushed him away coldly. "Mom!" Xiaobao cried out in alarm, but he saw Chu Ho turn around and leave. He chased after her in fear, but the road under his feet seemed to be endless. He ran and Chu Ho walked, but he could not catch up. "Mom!" No matter how much he screamed, Chu Ho did not look back. He was so frightened that he did not know what to do. He chased after her desperately, but he could only watch as Chu Ho's back gradually disappeared at the end of his sight. When he was awakened from his nightmare by the sound of thunder, he was already in a cold sweat and trembling. Unknowingly, tears streamed down his face. The more Xiaobao recalled the scene in his dream, the more frightened he became. He rarely dreamed. Even if he did, he would forget everything in the dream when he woke up. However, this dream was extremely clear. Even when he woke up, it was still deeply engraved in his memory. "Mom," Xiaobao cried sadly. The crying alarmed Gu Jinglian, who was reading in the study. He had the habit of reading before going to bed. When he heard the crying, he walked into the master bedroom and saw Xiaobao covering his eyes and crying bitterly. "Why are you crying again?" Gu Jinglian looked a little unhappy. Why was his son crying all day long? He looked so weak and frail. He was the blood of the Gu family after all. He did not inherit his courage at all. He was like a fragile glass doll. When should he bring him to gain experience? Gu Jinglian cursed silently in his heart. As soon as Chu Xiaobao saw him, he felt a great sense of security in his heart. He got up and threw himself at him. He didn't care that the two of them had an earth-shattering cold war before. He threw himself into his arms without any scruples. Sob, sob, sob. "Uncle, Mommy doesn't want me anymore. I can't catch up with her no matter how hard I try. She doesn't want me anymore. She just left me like this." When Gu Jinglian saw her throwing herself into his arms so recklessly, he felt as if a soft spot in his heart had been touched. He could not help but reach out his hand and gently stroke the back of his head as a form of consolation. Nightmares? Woo-woo, Chu Xiaobao did not have the concept of a nightmare. He only knew that this dream had shattered all his hopes. Will Mom really abandon me? Why hasn't she come to find me after so long? Is she going to abandon Xiaobao? Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows, but his voice unconsciously softened. No. Really? It's just a nightmare. Be good. Gu Jinglian stroked his hair and said, "Go to sleep. Uncle, you won't abandon me, right?" Xiaobao still looked at him uneasily. Gu Jinglian looked at him and was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he smiled and said, "I won't." In this way, Xiaobao felt inexplicably relieved. He had just carried him to the bed and covered him with the blanket when his phone suddenly rang. Chapter 2774. What? We don't have enough manpower here. Young Master Gu, you see, trash. Gu Jinglian scolded and hung up the phone. Just as he was about to get up, he saw Xiaobao staring at him with tears in his eyes. Seeing that he was about to leave, he looked scared. "Uncle, where are you going? Are you going to leave me behind too?" Gu Jinglian frowned. Suddenly, he thought of something and his lips curled into a cold arc. Didn't he want to train his courage? Wasn't this the best time? Muroga Casino, the biggest casino under the Gu family. Now, there was a boiling cauldron of voices and the scene was chaotic. There were cheers and curses mixed in, and the mood was high. This was the biggest gambling den in the capital, and also the only casino in the capital that was not controlled by the government. It had always been controlled by the Gu family's Vermilion Bird Hall, and was also the territory of the Gu family's power. At this moment, in the middle of the hall, two groups of people were fighting with their weapons. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, accompanied by angry curses and roars, and the scene was chaotic. The gamblers were all crowded on the second floor in fear. Some people were injured because of the fierce conflict, but because of the chaos, they could not get out for a while. They had no choice but to cover their wounds and watch in a panic in front of the railing. Some people were already so scared that their legs were weak. They were half kneeling on the ground, and their faces were pale and colorless. Suddenly, there was a clamor from the crowd, with a sense of provocation and arrogance. It was arrogant and insufferably arrogant. Damn it. Brothers. Go. Smash it for me. Smash it for me. Take revenge for the brothers of the Green Dragon group who died in vain. Go. At the command, the people of the Green Dragon group all pulled out large machetes from their backs. Their faces were ferocious as they waved their machetes and rushed forward. The crowd became more and more chaotic. For a moment, there were wails, cries of pain, and sounds of fighting. At this moment, the door of the casino was suddenly kicked open by someone, accompanied by a deafening gunshot. The gunshot echoed in the hall for a long time, and the scene suddenly became strangely quiet. A group of men in black rushed in from the door, and then respectfully stood in 2 rows, bowing their heads. Then, a cold man's voice came from the door. I heard that someone is causing trouble on my territory. Just as he finished speaking, there was a sound of casual footsteps at the door, and a tall and slender figure slowly walked in. Everyone was stunned and surprised. Under the gazes of 2 rows of men in black, Gu Jinglian stood tall with his hands in his trouser pockets. His sharp eyes swept across the crowd gathered together and he let out a low chuckle. Green Dragon Group's mood. Or was it because I was not ruthless enough that you dared to stir up trouble under my watch? The man was wearing a black British long windbreaker, a pair of black trousers, and a pair of black high boots. His sharp black hair was neatly tied to his ears. He looked neat and free, and his whole body exuded an unruly aura. He was obviously a young man, but when he stood there, his every movement showed the demeanor of an emperor. It was as if he was born with an elegant and arrogant temperament. Gu Jinglian looked around at the messy scene, and the corners of his lips curved into a cold arc. Chapter 2775. From the moment he appeared, the crowd fell into a deathly silence. Everyone looked towards the door, and their hands froze in place. The people from the Green Dragon gang were stunned. They were shocked by his imposing manner and stood rooted to the ground, not daring to move. Young Master Gu. It's young Master Gu. A man suddenly exclaimed in surprise and rushed out from the crowd. He quickly ran in front of her and respectfully bowed his body. He lowered his head and said loudly, Young Master Gu. I don't know what happened today, but the Green Dragon gang brought people to cause trouble. Before he finished speaking, Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows impatiently and kicked him to the side. The force of the blow was so strong that even the man, who had been fighting in the black streets for many years, could not withstand it. He flew a few meters away and fell to the ground, coughing up a mouthful of blood. Useless thing. Gu Jinglian arrogantly scolded and walked in front of him. He kicked his shoulder. The man groaned and fell to the ground, his face full of cold sweat. Gu Jinglian walked towards him and his patent leather boots stepped on his chest mercilessly. He coughed and raised his head. He saw a pair of evil eyes shining like a ghost hiding in the night, ghostly and fierce. He narrowed his eyes dangerously. The man was so scared that he hurriedly got up and knelt on the ground, trembling. His shoulders trembled violently. I said, I don't keep useless people under me. Gu Jinglian said coldly. His amber eyes suddenly flashed with a glimmer of light and there was a touch of disdain in his eyes. He slowly raised his eyes and his sharp gaze swept across the crowd in front of him. His voice was like a bloodthirsty demon, you dare to cause trouble here, so don't dream of walking out of here alive. After saying that, he raised his chin and signaled with his eyes. The door behind him was closed and locked. A group of men in black took out their pistols neatly and skillfully. The dark holes were aimed at the people from the Green Dragon gang. At the same time, the gamblers who surrounded the railings on the second floor sucked in a sharp breath. Gu Jinglian looked up expressionlessly and pulled out a pistol from his waist. He pointed it at the crowd and curled his lips impatiently. "I'll shoot whoever makes another sound." His skin was fair and clean, his eyebrows were sword-like, and his eyes were upturned. He looked extremely devilish. His facial features were clearly so beautiful and exquisite. His delicate and pretty contours were dyed with traces of cold and sharp heroic spirit because of his cold eyes. Cries of surprise rose and fell from the group of gamblers as they retreated one after another. On the other side, the members of the Azure Dragon group opened up a path. A burly man slowly walked in front of Gu Jinglian. This man was the leader of the Azure Dragon group, known as Long Si. The Dragon sect was the head of the three major Hadao clans in the capital. It was once an all-powerful clan in the capital, and its reputation spread far and wide. At that time, the Dragon sect and the Gu family stood side by side. They were on par with each other and were feared by other clans. They once had a glorious period. However, since the young master of the Dragon sect, Long Air, passed away 3 years ago, the Dragon sect had declined. Their power had greatly weakened and even their status had fallen to the bottom. Chapter 2776. The Long family's bloodline was extremely weak. In the early years, because the Long family's status was unstable, Long Air's first 2 children were assassinated and persecuted. Later on, Long Air had a son. However, when Long Air passed away 3 years ago, Long Si was only 16 years old. In order to revive the Long family's prosperity and protect the Dragon sect status in the underworld, Long Si had no choice but to rope in other families through marriage a year ago to obtain protection. However, the prosperity of the Dragon sect was something Gu Jinglian could not bear to see. No emperor would be willing to share the country with others. The capital was his territory. If the Dragon sect wanted to rise, they had to ask if he could agree. Therefore, a few days ago, the Gu family gathered together and took action. In less than 3 days, they wiped out the casino and Jiangnan clubhouse that the Dragon sect controlled. The Dragon sect's vitality was greatly damaged. The Jiangnan clubhouse was the Dragon sect's largest gathering place. On that night, the Dragon sect's glorious history became a thing of the past. Long Air flew into a rage out of humiliation. Therefore, he gathered his men on this day to bring bad luck to the Gu family. Even if both sides suffered losses and perished together, he would not hesitate. "Young Master Gu, long time no see." Long Air opened his mouth, but his voice was hoarse. When he laughed, he was evil and threatening. Gu Jinglian looked around and frowned slightly. Long Air, sometimes a last-ditch struggle is not a wise choice. His tone was filled with mockery. Long Air flew into a rage out of humiliation and said angrily, "Cut the crap. Go, go." Long Air pointed at Gu Jinglian. "Kill him." The group of people behind Long Air was ready to move. With a command, the group of burly men behind Long Air rushed toward Gu Jinglian at lightning speed. "Gu Jinglian, tonight is the day you die." Gu Jinglian looked at the crowd rushing toward him casually and sneered. Then, he waved his coat away and gently unbuttoned his collar. "Protect young Master Gu." The Dragon sect's fighters rushed towards him. The man in the lead had a body of terrifying muscles, especially the bulging muscles on his arms. It was as though his clothes were about to burst. He strode over, raised his fist, and smashed it down on Gu Jinglian's face. However, in the next second, Gu Jinglian raised his hand and caught his punch. The man was shocked and looked up, only to see a cold look of contempt in Gu Jinglian's eyes. "You overestimate yourself." In the next second, Gu Jinglian twisted and broke his wrist. "Ah!" The man roared in pain. Gu Jinglian pulled out his gun and aimed it between the man's eyebrows. With a bang, he gave the man a quick death. Blood splattered all over his body, staining it red. Gu Jinglian smiled coldly, but he didn't say much. He waved his hand lightly, and his subordinates immediately swarmed forward. Gu Jinglian was famous for his ruthlessness. The Azure Dragon gang dared to cause trouble in the Gu family's territory, so they naturally cut off their own escape route. Chapter 2777. Bang, bang, bang. Long Si turned pale with fright. He did not expect Gu Jinglian to be able to mobilize so many people in such a short period of time. The two sides fought fiercely, and the scene was intense. Smoke filled the air and blood flowed like a river. Tonight was destined to be a bloody night in Moroga. There were severely injured people lying on the ground. Some of them had already stopped breathing. Most of the gamblers had seen the world, but they had never seen such a grand scene. They could not help but be stunned on the spot. Some of the more timid ones were so scared that they almost peed their pants. Just as the crowd was restless, a child's loud cry suddenly came from outside the closed door. Gu Jinglian paused and silently put away his gun. He signaled to his subordinates with his eyes. As soon as the door was opened, the child's childish cries became louder and louder. A handsome young man rushed in with a crying face holding a child who looked no more than 5 years old. Gu Jinglian took a look and his eyebrows twitched. Dark clouds covered his face. Everyone looked at the child. The man was very tall, so when such a small child nestled in his chest, he looked too small. The boy was very cute. His skin was fair and tender, his hair was black, and his eyes were bright and clear. At this moment, there were sparkling tears in his eyes. However, this child was not as soft and weak as she looked. At this moment, she had a fierce expression as she bared her fangs and brandished her claws, tearing at the man's face and hair. She kicked and kicked at the man's arms with her little feet as she cried loudly. The man was called Maman, and he was one of Gu Jinglian's most trusted subordinates. Now, such a fierce man was carrying such a small child. It was a little out of place. He held up the little child's hands in front of Gu Jinglian as if he was presenting a treasure. "Boss, the young master has been crying non-stop. I can't coax him no matter how hard I try." Maman frowned in distress. Before he could say anything, Chu Xiaobao in his arms pouted his cherry-red lips and cried out twice. His teary eyes stared innocently at Gu Jinglian. That sad and pitiful look in his eyes made one feel pity for him. Gu Jinglian carried him in his arms with one hand. Chu Xiaobao hugged his shoulders and looked around curiously. Just now, he was carried by Maman outside the door. It was pouring rain outside and thunder was rumbling. He was timid and was scared to tears, crying for Gu Jinglian. Gu Jinglian did not want the little guy to come into contact with such a scene. However, as the young master of the Gu family, he would definitely see more of such scenes in the future. He soon discovered the corpse lying in a pool of blood in the casino. Confusion flashed across his eyes, but when he recognized the sticky bloodstains on the ground, his face turned ghastly pale in fright. "Uncle." "Ugh, so much blood." Maman looked at the child's shocked expression and could not help but ask worriedly, "Do you want the young master to leave for a while?" "No need." Gu Jinglian sneered, "The people of the Gu family have lived a life of licking blood from the tip of a knife since they were young. If they can't even see such a scene, how can they still be considered a member of the Gu family?" Chapter 2778. There's no need. Gu Jinglian sneered. The Gu family members had been living on the edge of a knife since young. If they can't even see such a scene, how can they still be considered part of the Gu family? Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao Chu with one hand. His eyes suddenly narrowed dangerously as he cursed silently in his heart. Who gave the Green Dragon gang the courage to come knocking on his door? As he thought about it, he called out, "Lin Suong." A response came from the black suit behind him. After a while, a burly man walked out. He lowered his head and walked in front of him. He said in a deep voice, "Boss, please give me your orders." Gu Jinglian's fingertips gently caressed the baby's soft cheeks. He said without raising his head, "If I remember correctly, Moroga has always been under the jurisdiction of Vermilion Bird Hall. As the hall master of Vermilion Bird Hall, you let me see such a scene today. I'm very unhappy." His strange smile suddenly sent a chill down Lin Suhong's spine. He was a little shocked. Just as he was feeling guilty, he saw the man turn around and glance at him from the corner of his eyes. He said with a smile that was not a smile, "You should know that I don't keep useless people under me." You should think about how to protect your position as hall master. His heart suddenly sank. He immediately rushed in front of him and knelt on the ground with a plop. He said with a head full of cold sweat, "I'm sorry. Boss. What happened tonight was my mistake. Get out of the way. Don't block the way." Gu Jinglian did not even look at him and kicked him to the side. He walked a few steps towards the door and suddenly remembered something. He said coldly, "Lin Suong, if you don't clean this place up, don't think about keeping your hands." After saying that, he sneered and walked away with the baby in one hand. He left Lin Suong alone on the ground, trembling with fear. Until Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao Chu out of the door, the child in his arms was still in great fear and trembling all over. So much blood, so much blood. The ground is covered in blood. Chu Xiaobao had never seen such a scene before. However, for as long as Gu Jinglian could remember, he was carried in the arms of his father's subordinates. When he was patrolling the casino, he was not used to seeing such a scene. Those who had their fingers chopped off because of cheating were holding their bloody palms and wailing in pain. The gamblers who had their legs broken and were lying on the ground convulsing from the immense pain. In fact, because of the drug abuse, he was in a state of madness. The scenes of men and women abandoning all restraint were incomparably deep in his memory when he was young. Children who grew up in the Gu family had to experience this from a young age. Chu Xiaobao asked fearfully, "Uncle, did you kill those people?" Gu Jinglian leaned lazily against the back seat and lowered his head to look helplessly at Xiaobao, who was crying non-stop in his arms. He was physically and mentally exhausted from the crying. He gently ran his long fingers through his hair and sighed in annoyance. It seemed that he had made a wrong decision. It seemed that he should not have brought this child to such an occasion. Looking at him crying and throwing a tantrum, he actually felt a sense of pity for him. Was it an illusion? He actually felt heartache and pity for a person. Could it be that because this child was his flesh and blood, he had developed a feeling of pity for the child? "Stop crying." Mammon, who was at the side, was dumbfounded. Chapter 2779. Chu Xiaobao, this guy, was his child. When he first learned of this fact, he could not accept it. After all, a little guy who fell from the sky with the same bloodline as him was too sudden, so he could not quickly integrate into the role of a father. He could not help but think that life was really a strange thing. Inexplicably, this child who appeared had his blood flowing in his body. However, he was cold and proud. He had no concept of such a special emotion as family. However, when he saw Chu Xiaobao curled up in the corner of the sofa, dozing off, his head heavy. In the end, he fell clumsily on the sofa. Then, he woke up abruptly and got up from the sofa. He rubbed his eyes sleepily. That sleepy and confused look was actually a little simple and honest and cute. Like a little panda. For some reason, the place in his heart softened slightly. For the first time, he realized that such a cute little guy was his son. He walked to the sofa and reached out to ravage his head. In his confusion, Xiaobao reached out his small hand to grab his hand. Such a small hand just happened to hold two of his fingers. It was so soft and cute. This kind of emotion resonated with him. It was really magical. Her hands were so small and tender as if they were carved out of tofu. Her cheeks were pink and had the unique milky fragrance of a child. Her chubby body, especially her belly, was so round that it looked as if it could be broken by the wind. Perhaps it was because she had eaten her fill at dinner. Gu Jinglian looked at him seriously. His eyebrows and eyes were similar to his, but they were not fully open yet. His eyes were black and white, watery, and sparkling. His eyelids were slightly red. Perhaps it was because he had cried just now, but his eyelashes were still faintly stained with dew. They were very similar. At first, he did not particularly look at this child. When his subordinates said that this child was similar to him, he did not think much of it. However, after taking a closer look, he realized that they were very similar. Just like a replica of him when he was young. This was his son. Gu Jinglian's son. A descendant of the Gu family. He could not help but outline an unfamiliar arc. It was like tenderness. Seeing him cry, Gu Jinglian finally could not bear it. Maman. Yes. Gu Jinglian said, bring the little toy from the trunk over. Maman's eyebrows furrowed, and the corner of his lips twitched violently. He turned around and fetched it for him. Coax him. Gu Jinglian gave the order again. The corner of Maman's lips twitched again. If he was